The platform had no one waiting. The train wheezed to a stop with a grinding of metal that echoed across the empty platform. Steam hissed from beneath the carriages, rising like ghosts in the late October air. Eliza Jean Corbin stood at the door of the passenger car, her gloved hand gripping the cold iron rail, and stared out at what was supposed to be her new beginning. No one waited. The platform stretched before her, weathered boards dark with moisture, dusted with the season's first snow. Beyond it, the town of Copper Ridge sprawled in uneven rows of timber buildings, their roofs already white-capped. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, but not a single soul had ventured out to meet the afternoon train. Eliza lifted her chin and stepped down, her boot heel striking the platform with more force than necessary. At 5 feet and 10 inches, she had long ago learned that shrinking herself served no purpose. The conductor, a wiry man with tobacco-stained whiskers, handed down her trunk and carpetbag without meeting her eyes. "This is Copper Ridge, miss," he muttered, as if she might have forgotten where she'd bought passage to. "Thank you." Her voice came out steady, though her stomach churned. She'd exchanged 17 letters with the school board president, a Mr. Josiah Fletcher. He'd been effusive in his correspondence, promising a warm welcome, comfortable lodgings with a respectable widow, and 28 eager pupils awaiting instruction. The train's whistle shrieked. The conductor swung himself back aboard, and within moments, the great machine was pulling away, leaving Eliza alone on the platform with her belongings in the bitter Montana wind. She pulled her wool cloak tighter, though it did little against the cold that seemed to seep through every layer. Her traveling dress, a sensible brown serge that had seemed so appropriate in Missouri, now felt thin as paper. Snow began to fall in earnest, fat flakes that caught on her eyelashes and melted against her cheeks. The trunk was too heavy to carry far. Eliza dragged it to the edge of the platform and looked down the main street. The Grand Hotel stood directly across, its windows glowing amber in the gathering dusk. Perhaps Mr. Fletcher had been delayed. Perhaps he waited inside, warming himself by a fire. She left the trunk and crossed the muddy street, holding her skirts high enough to keep them from the worst of the muck. The hotel door was heavy oak with a brass handle that had seen better days. Inside, the lobby smelled of coal smoke, wet wool, and something that might have been cabbage. A clerk dozed behind the desk, his head tilted back, mouth open. Eliza cleared her throat. When that produced no effect, she rang the small bell on the counter. The man jerked awake, blinking rapidly. "Help you, ma'am. I'm looking for Mr. Josiah Fletcher. I'm Miss Corbin, the new school teacher. He was meant to meet my train." The clerk's expression shifted from drowsy to uncomfortable. He scratched at his neck, avoiding her gaze. "Fletcher, no, ma'am. Haven't seen him today. Haven't seen him in, must be 2 weeks now." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Eliza's feet. 2 weeks, but I received a letter from him just last month. He confirmed my arrival date. "Well now, that may be so, but Fletcher lit out for California. Gold fever, they say. Took his whole family and didn't tell nobody his plans till the day before." The clerk finally looked at her properly, taking in her height, her angular features, the determined set of her jaw. Something flickered in his eyes. Was it pity? "You came all the way from Missouri?" "Yes." The word barely made it past the tightness in her throat. "Alone?" "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "Well, that's a shame. A real shame. Mrs. Hartwell, she's the widow Fletcher arranged your board with. She rented that room to a mining engineer last week. Figured you weren't coming after all." Eliza stood very still, processing this information. No position, no lodgings, no one expecting her. She had $47 sewn into the lining of her corset. Enough for return passage if she was careful. But the thought of slinking back to Missouri made her stomach turn. She'd sold everything to come here, her mother's pearl brooch, her father's watch, even the family Bible with its records of births and deaths going back 3 generations. "Is there another boarding house?" she asked. The clerk's discomfort deepened. "Not for unmarried ladies, ma'am, not proper ones. Anyway," the implication hung in the air between them. Eliza's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice level. "And the school? Surely they still need a teacher." "Oh, well, that would be Mrs. Prudence Walsh you'd need to speak to. She took over the school board when Fletcher left. She runs the mercantile with her son." He gestured vaguely eastward. "But they close at 5, and it's past that now." Through the hotel windows, Eliza could see the snow falling harder, the sky already purple dark. Her trunk still sat on the platform, probably half buried by now. She thought of the neat stack of letters in her carpet bag, Fletcher's flowing script promising a new life for a woman of education and good character. "Might I at least warm myself by your fire for a moment?" she asked. The clerk shifted his weight. "Hotel policy is paying guests only. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but Mr. Garrett is particular about such things." Of course he was. Eliza straightened her spine, squared her shoulders, and gave the man a nod that her mother would have called regal. "Thank you for the information." She turned and walked back into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical blow, driving snow into her face. She retrieved her carpet bag from where she'd set it by the door and struggled back to the platform. Her trunk was indeed collecting snow, the leather already damp. She couldn't leave it here overnight. Everything she owned was inside. Down the street, lights glowed in windows. She could see figures moving behind curtains, families settling in for supper. The smell of wood smoke and cooking meat made her stomach clench. She'd eaten only a heel of bread and an apple since morning, saving her money for the new life that was supposed to begin today. A group of men emerged from a building marked Silver Dollar Saloon. They walked with the careful steps of those who'd been drinking, their laughter sharp in the cold air. One of them noticed her and nudged his companion. They all turned to stare. Eliza bent to her trunk, trying to drag it toward the shelter of the depot's overhanging roof. The men's voices carried on the wind. "Would you look at that? She's nearly tall as Big Jim. What's a woman that size doing here alone? Maybe she's looking for work at May's place." More laughter, harsh and knowing. Eliza's hands shook as she tugged at the trunk. It scraped across the boards, painfully slow. The men were moving closer, their boots heavy on the platform. "Need some help there, miss?" The speaker was broad-shouldered, with a beard that hadn't seen a barber in months. His breath clouded the air between them, thick with whiskey. "No, thank you." Eliza didn't look up, just kept pulling the trunk. "Don't be proud now. A lady shouldn't be doing such heavy work." He reached for the trunk handle, his hand brushing hers. Eliza jerked back. "I said no, thank you." The man's expression hardened. "Just trying to be neighborly, though I guess a woman traveling alone ain't too concerned with what's proper." His companions chuckled. One of them, younger than the rest with a mean twist to his mouth, stepped closer. "You the new sporting girl May said she was expecting someone from back east." The words hit Eliza like a slap. She straightened to her full height, which put her eye level with the bearded man. "I'm the new schoolteacher." They found this hilarious. The younger one slapped his thigh. "Schoolteacher, did you hear that? Boys, this here giant thinks she's gonna teach our young ones their letters." "My Mary won't sit still for no woman who looks like she could wrestle a bull," another added. The bearded man studied her with bloodshot eyes. "There ain't no new schoolteacher coming. Fletcher's gone, and good riddance. You best get back on whatever train brought you here." "The train's gone," Eliza said quietly. "Well then." His smile was unpleasant. "Guess you're in a pickle, but I'm sure May would take you on. She's not particular about looks, long as you're willing." The wind gusted, driving snow between them. Eliza's hands were numb inside her gloves, her feet like blocks of ice. She thought of her small room back in Missouri, the narrow bed, the view of the churchyard where her parents lay. She'd left it all for the promise of a place where she might be more than the spinster who helped with other people's children, who sat in the back pew at church, who was too tall, too plain, too much of everything a woman shouldn't be. "Excuse me," she said, and bent again to her trunk. The men didn't move. If anything, they closed in tighter. The bearded one put his boot on the trunk, pinning it in place. "Now don't be unfriendly. We're just trying to help you understand how things are here." Eliza's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "Remove your foot, sir. Or what you'll tell the school board." More laughter. She was calculating her options. Leave the trunk and run. Scream for help. Try to push past them when a new voice cut through the wind. "Evening, gentlemen." The men turned. A figure stood at the edge of the platform, barely visible through the driving snow. As he stepped into the circle of lamplight, Eliza saw a tall man in a long duster, his hat pulled low against the weather. He moved with an easy grace that suggested either complete confidence or complete indifference to danger. "Calder," the bearded man said, his tone suddenly wary. "Didn't expect to see you in town." "Supply run." The newcomer's voice was low, gravelly. "Looks like you fellows are having a party. Am I invited?" The younger man snorted. "Just explaining to this lady how things work in Copper Ridge." "That's so." Calder stepped closer, and now Eliza could see his face weathered, angular, with dark eyes that gave nothing away. He looked at her trunk, at the boot still resting on it, at her. "Seems like the lady understands just fine. In fact, seems like she asked you to move your foot. Brennan." The bearded man Brennan shifted his weight but didn't comply. "This ain't your business, Holt." "Maybe not." Calder pulled off his gloves with deliberate slowness. "But I've had a long day, and I'd like to load my supplies and get home before this storm gets worse. Hard to do that with you boys blocking the platform." "Platform's big enough," Brennan said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Calder smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Sure it is. But see, I'm particular about where I walk. And right now, I want to walk right where you're standing." The tension stretched tight as wire. Eliza could see the calculations happening behind Brennan's eyes, the whiskey courage warring with whatever reputation Calder Holt carried in this town. Finally, he lifted his boot from the trunk. "Wasn't nothing but a conversation," he muttered. "Come on, boys. May's girls will be wondering where we got to." They filed past, the younger one shoulder-checking Calder as he went. Calder didn't budge, didn't even acknowledge the contact. He waited until they disappeared into the swirling snow before turning to Eliza. "You hurt." "No." Her voice came out rougher than intended. "Thank you." He studied her for a moment, taking in her height, her traveling clothes, the trunk that clearly held everything she owned. "You're the teacher Fletcher promised." It wasn't a question, but Eliza nodded anyway. "Though it seems Mr. Fletcher has gone to California." "He do that." Calder moved to the other end of her trunk. "Where are you staying?" "I haven't arranged that yet." His eyebrows rose slightly. The only sign of surprise, "It's past 6, near dark, and there's a storm coming in that'll dump 2 feet before morning." "I'm aware." Eliza grabbed her end of the trunk. Together, they lifted it easily. "Where are we taking this?" She hesitated. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won. "I don't know. I've only just learned that my position and lodgings no longer exist." Calder was quiet for a moment. Snow collected on his hat brim, on the shoulders of his duster. "Finally," he said, "I've got a wagon at the feed store. Tarp should have kept the supplies mostly dry. You can ride out to my place if you want. It's not fancy, but it's warm." Eliza knew she should refuse. A proper woman didn't go off with strange men, especially not to isolated cabins. But proper women also didn't find themselves abandoned on train platforms in Montana storms. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition. It's necessity." He started walking, carrying his end of the trunk. Unless you'd prefer to try your luck at the Silver Dollar, they might have a corner you could curl up in. The thought of going back there, of facing those men again, made her decision. Thank you, Mr. Holt, Calder Holt. Thank you, Mr. Holt. I'm Eliza Corbin. They carried the trunk through the storm-darkened streets. Eliza's skirts dragged in the snow, and her teeth chattered despite her best efforts to control them. Calder led the way to a modest building where a wagon waited. Covered in canvas and already collecting snow, a pair of draft horses stood patiently in the traces, their breath steaming. They loaded the trunk, and Calder helped her up to the wagon seat. His hand was warm and calloused through her thin glove, and he held on just long enough to ensure she was steady before letting go. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Eliza caught herself studying his profile. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His nose had been broken at least once, and a scar ran through his left eyebrow. But there was something solid about him, like he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains looming invisible beyond the storm. "It's an hour to my place in good weather," he said, releasing the brake. "Tonight might take longer. There's blankets under the seat if you need them." Eliza found the blankets and wrapped one around her shoulders as they pulled away from town, leaving the lights behind. She wondered if she was making a terrible mistake, but anything seemed better than standing on that platform, waiting for a welcome that would never come. The horses knew the way, picking their path carefully through the deepening snow. Calder drove in silence, occasionally murmuring to the team. Eliza pulled the blanket tighter and watched the white world roll by, trying not to think about what morning would bring, or what kind of man offered shelter to strange women in storms. For now, she was moving away from humiliation and toward warmth. It was enough. "We didn't expect you to be this tall." The morning came too bright, too sudden. Eliza woke to unfamiliar walls and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, she couldn't place herself. Then memory rushed back. The platform, the storm, Calder Holt's wagon cutting through white darkness to this cabin tucked into the hillside. She sat up on the narrow cot he'd given her near the fireplace, still wearing her traveling dress, now wrinkled beyond redemption. Her shoes sat neatly by the hearth where she'd placed them to dry. Through the single window, she could see the storm had passed, leaving the world buried in pristine snow that sparkled like crushed diamonds. "Coffee's ready," Calder said from near the stove. He didn't turn around, giving her privacy to compose herself. Eliza finger-combed her hair, pinning the worst of it back into place. Her reflection in the window glass showed a pale woman with shadows under her eyes, collar askew, looking nothing like the composed teacher she'd intended to present to Copper Ridge. "Thank you," she said, standing and smoothing her skirts. The cabin was small but clean, everything in its place. Tools hung on pegs, books lined a shelf above the table, and morning light made the rough wood walls almost golden. Calder handed her a tin cup, steam curling up between them. He'd already been outside, snow clung to his boots, and his dark hair was damp at the edges. Storm broke around midnight. Roads should be passable by afternoon. Eliza wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Holt. I'll go to town today and speak with the school board president, Mrs. Walsh." The clerk said. Something flickered across Calder's face. He turned back to the stove, pouring his own coffee. "Prudence Walsh. She runs the Mercantile. You know her. Everyone knows everyone in Copper Ridge." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "She's particular about things, has strong opinions. About education. About everything." Eliza took a sip of coffee, finding it strong enough to strip paint, but somehow exactly what she needed. "Well, I have strong opinions about education myself. I'm sure we'll find common ground." Calder studied her over his cup. In daylight, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35 to her 28. The scar through his eyebrow was white against sun-weathered skin. "You always this optimistic?" "I traveled 900 miles for this position." Eliza said. I sold everything I couldn't carry. If Mrs. Walsh needs convincing, I'll convince her. He didn't reply, just gathered bread and preserves from a covered shelf. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Eliza found herself stealing glances at his hands scarred from work, careful in their movements, unexpectedly gentle as he spread jam on coarse bread. After breakfast, Calder hitched the horses while Eliza tried to make herself presentable. She heated water and washed her face, repinned her hair properly, and shook the worst wrinkles from her skirts. Her good dress was in the trunk, but she couldn't very well change clothes in a bachelor's cabin. The ride to town was different in daylight. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks lost in clouds. Pine forests marched up the slopes, heavy with snow. The road wound between hills, following what Calder told her was Copper Creek, though she couldn't see water beneath the ice. How long have you lived here? She asked, partly to fill the silence, partly from genuine curiosity. 7 years. Came up from Wyoming. And before that? He glanced at her. Here and there. Worked cattle, mostly. Some railroad work. The clerk said you used to be a blacksmith. His hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the reins. Did some of that too. Eliza recognized the tone of someone closing a door on further questions. She'd used it often enough herself when people asked why she wasn't married, why she'd chosen such a hard life. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but she noticed he took the easier path when there was a choice, avoided the worst ruts, and twice stopped to rest the horses, though they showed no signs of strain. Copper Ridge looked different in daylight, smaller, shabbier, but somehow more honest. The grand facades she'd imagined in the storm revealed themselves as false fronts on simple frame buildings. Miners trudged through the snow toward the shift change. Women swept wooden sidewalks clear, their breath puffing white. Children pressed faces to windows, watching the wagon pass. Calder pulled up in front of Walsh Mercantile. A neat sign proclaimed, dry goods, mining supplies, school board office Mrs. P. Walsh, proprietor. You want me to wait? He asked. That's not necessary. You've done more than enough. Eliza climbed down before he could help, though the drop jarred her cold, stiffened joints. Thank you again, Mr. Holt. He touched his hat brim. Good luck, Miss Corbin. She watched him drive toward the feed store, then squared her shoulders and entered the mercantile. A bell chimed overhead. The store smelled of pickle brine, leather, and lye soap. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, packed with everything from canned peaches to blasting powder. A woman emerged from behind the counter like a frigate under full sail. Prudence Walsh was everything Eliza was not small. Round, soft-looking in lavender wool with carefully arranged gray curls, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. May I help you? The tone suggested she doubted it. Mrs. Walsh, I'm Eliza Corbin. I've come about the teaching position. The woman's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, grew colder. The teaching position. Yes, Mr. Fletcher hired me. I have his letters. Mr. Fletcher is no longer with us. Mrs. Walsh moved behind the counter, a barrier between them, and any arrangements he made departed with him. Eliza pulled the packet of letters from her carpet bag. But the position itself must still exist. The children still need education. Indeed they do, Mrs. Walsh didn't reach for the letters. Which is why I've made other arrangements. My nephew Theodore arrived from Denver last week. He'll be taking over the school. The floor seemed to tilt. Eliza gripped the counter edge. But I was hired. I have a contract. Signed by a man who abandoned his responsibilities. Mrs. Walsh's smile was thin as paper. Surely you understand we couldn't wait indefinitely. I'm here exactly when I said I would be. Yes, well... The woman's gaze traveled up Eliza's frame, lingering at her height. Perhaps it's for the best. We really didn't expect... That is, Mr. Fletcher may have been hasty in his decision. Because I'm a woman. Don't be ridiculous. We've had female teachers before. Mrs. Walsh busied herself straightening already straight items on the counter. It's simply a matter of suitability. In what way am I unsuitable? The woman's nostrils flared. Miss Corbin, I'll speak plainly. Our children need a teacher who can provide a gentle, nurturing presence. Someone who can model appropriate feminine behavior. She gestured vaguely at Eliza's height. You're simply too much. Too much, Eliza's voice came out dangerously quiet. Too tall, too... Mrs. Walsh searched for words. Imposing. The younger children would be frightened. And the older boys, well, they need a firm hand. They'd never respect a woman who looks like she should be plowing fields rather than teaching letters. The words hit like physical blows, each one finding old wounds. How many times had she heard variations too tall to dance with, too angular to be pretty, too educated to be marriage material, too much of all the wrong things, not enough of what mattered. I have a degree from Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, Eliza said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I've taught for 6 years. I have recommendations from... I'm sure your credentials are impressive. Mrs. Walsh moved toward the door, dismissal clear in every line of her body. But Copper Ridge is a particular sort of place. We have particular needs. Theodore understands those needs. He's already moved into the teacher's cottage and will begin classes Monday. This is illegal. I have a contract. Then take it up with Mr. Fletcher in California. The woman opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air. Good day, Miss Corbin. I hope you have a pleasant journey home. Eliza stood frozen for a moment, rage and humiliation warring in her chest. Through the window, she could see people going about their business, a town that needed a teacher, children who deserved education, and this woman denying it all because Eliza's bones grew too long. She walked out with her chin high, but her hands shook as she gripped her carpet bag. The door slammed behind her with finality. On the sidewalk, she stood blinking in the bright snowlight. Now what? She had money for return passage, but the next train wouldn't come for 3 days. Even if she wanted to slink home in defeat and the thought made her stomach churn, she was trapped here. Miss Corbin. She turned to find a young woman, perhaps 16, with mouse-brown hair and worried eyes. The girl glanced nervously at the mercantile door. Yes, I'm Lucy Walsh. Mrs. Walsh is my aunt. The girl spoke in a rush, words tumbling over each other. I was listening. I know I shouldn't have, but I did, and it's not fair what she said. Theodore can barely read himself. He only got the job because he's family. Eliza softened slightly. That's kind of you to say. It's not kind. It's true. Lucy twisted her hands in her apron. My little brother Samuel. He's struggling with his arithmetic, and the Morrison twins need help with their writing. Theodore won't help them. He only cares about the children whose parents can pay extra for special attention. I'm sorry to hear that, but there's nothing I can do. Your aunt was quite clear. Lucy bit her lip. There might be another way. Not through the official school, but would you consider private tutoring? Some of the families can't afford much, but they want better for their children. A spark of hope flickered. Your aunt would never allow it. She doesn't control what people do in their own homes. Lucy glanced around, then stepped closer. Mrs. Garrett at the hotel. Her daughter is bright but shy. She'd bloom with the right teacher. And Mr. Chen, who runs the laundry. His children aren't even allowed in the public school, but he's desperate for them to learn English properly. Eliza's mind raced. It wasn't what she'd planned, but it was something. I'd need somewhere to stay. I might know someone, Lucy said. Let me ask around. Can you wait at the hotel cafe? Aunt Prudence goes home for lunch at noon. I'll meet you then. The girl hurried back into the mercantile before Eliza could respond. Left alone on the sidewalk, she considered her options. Trust this girl's half-formed plan, or start the long journey back to a life that had already closed its doors to her. She thought of Calder Holt's quiet kindness, of Lucy's earnest face, of children somewhere in this town who needed what she could give. Then she thought of Mrs. Walsh's dismissive words, too much. Maybe she was, but maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what Copperidge needed, whether it knew it or not. She picked up her carpetbag and headed for the hotel, her long stride eating up the distance. Behind her, she felt eyes watching from windows, the town already forming its opinions. Let them look. Let them measure her height and find her wanting. She'd been found wanting before. This time, she'd make them reconsider. The hotel cafe was nearly empty. Just 2 miners finishing their breakfast before heading to the day shift. They glanced up when she entered, and she saw the familiar sequence play across their faces: surprise at her height, assessment of her unmarried state, dismissal of her as anyone important. She ordered tea and toast, counting her coins carefully. $47 had seemed like security this morning. Now it felt like a rapidly shrinking lifeline. She'd need to be very careful, very clever, if she was going to make this work. As she waited, she thought about the children Lucy had mentioned. Private tutoring wouldn't pay as well as a teaching position, but it might lead to something more. And there was something appealing about the idea of teaching without Mrs. Walsh's oversight, without anyone telling her she was too much or not enough. The clock above the bar showed 11:30. Eliza nursed her tea and watched the street through the window. Copperidge went about its business: women shopping, men hauling supplies, children dodging between wagons despite their mother's scolding. A movement caught her eye. Calder Holt's wagon sat outside the feed store, loaded with supplies. As she watched, he emerged carrying a sack of grain on his shoulder. He moved with the same easy grace she'd noticed last night, making the heavy work look effortless. He happened to glance toward the hotel and saw her through the window. For a moment, they regarded each other across the snowy street. Then he touched his hat brim and continued loading his wagon. "You know Calder Holt." Eliza turned to find one of the miners watching her with interest. He was older, grizzled, with kind eyes and a weathered face. "He was kind enough to help me yesterday," she said carefully. The miner nodded. "That's Calder. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's good people. Shame what happened with the railroad. But he seems content enough now." Eliza wanted to ask what he meant, but the man's companion was pulling him toward the door, muttering about shift changes and foremen. They left, and she was alone again with her cooling tea and growing doubts. At precisely noon, Lucy Walsh slipped through the cafe door. Her cheeks were flushed with cold and excitement. She slid into the chair across from Eliza, glancing around nervously. "I found something," she said without preamble. "Mrs. Chen, the laundry owner's wife, she has a room above their shop. It's small, but it's clean and warm. She'll take $15 a month, including meals." Eliza calculated quickly. That would leave her enough to last 2 months, maybe 3 if she was careful. Time enough to build a clientele, establish herself. And the tutoring. "I've already had 3 inquiries." Lucy pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "Mrs. Garrett will pay $2 a week for her daughter. Mr. Chen offers the same for his 2 children. And," she lowered her voice, "the Brennan family wants help for their eldest boy. He's struggling, and they're willing to pay $3 a week." Brennan. The name made Eliza stiffen. The bearded man from the platform, his boot on her trunk. "I know Tom Brennan was awful to you yesterday," Lucy interrupted. "The whole town's heard about it, but his wife Martha is mortified. She wants to make amends, and she's desperate. Their boy Daniel is smart but wild. The other teachers have given up on him. $7 a week. Not a fortune, but enough to survive on. And if word spread, if she could prove herself despite Mrs. Walsh's opposition." "All right," Eliza said. "I'll do it." Lucy's face lit up. "Really, oh, that's wonderful, Mrs. Chen said you could move in today, and I'll spread the word quietly. Of course, Aunt Prudence can't stop people from hiring private tutors, but best not to provoke her unnecessarily." They made arrangements to meet at the laundry in an hour. Lucy hurried out, leaving Eliza to finish her cold tea and contemplate this unexpected turn. Not the triumphant arrival she'd imagined, but not defeat either. She paid her bill and stepped outside. The sun was high now, making the snow blindingly bright. As she stood there, carpetbag in hand, she saw Theodore Walsh emerging from what must be the teacher's cottage. He was young, soft-looking, with the same sharp eyes as his aunt. He walked with a proprietary air, master of the domain that should have been hers. Their eyes met across the street. His gaze traveled up her height, and his lip curled in what might have been amusement or disdain. Then he turned away, dismissing her as thoroughly as his aunt had. Eliza felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but underneath it, something else stirred. Determination, perhaps, or simple stubborn refusal to be dismissed. She hefted her carpetbag and started toward the laundry, her long stride carrying her forward into whatever came next, behind her. She felt the eyes of Copperridge watching, judging, finding her wanting. Let them watch. She'd prove them wrong, one child at a time. The cabin light down the hill. 3 weeks into her new life, Eliza had established a routine that almost felt sustainable. Mornings with the Chen children, teaching English through patient repetition. Afternoons with timid Sarah Garrett, coaxing words from the girl like drawing water from a deep well. Evenings with Daniel Brennan, who fought learning like it was a physical enemy but showed flashes of brilliant understanding when he forgot to rebel. The room above the laundry was indeed small, barely larger than a closet, but it was hers. Mrs. Chen left tea and rice at her door, and the constant warmth from the washrooms below kept the worst of the November cold at bay. If the steam made everything perpetually damp, if the smell of lye soap clung to her clothes, well, it was better than the alternative. But tonight was different. Daniel hadn't shown up for his lesson, and when Eliza inquired, Martha Brennan had answered the door with red-rimmed eyes, explaining that Tom had forbidden it. "Says it ain't natural, a woman like you teaching boys," she'd whispered, then shut the door before Eliza could respond. The loss of $3 a week shouldn't have mattered so much. She'd gained 2 new students just yesterday. But it was the principle of it, the reminder that she existed here on sufferance, that one man's prejudice could snatch away what she'd built. She walked through the early winter dusk, past the main street toward the southern edge of town, where the buildings thinned out. She needed air that didn't smell of soap, space where she didn't feel the weight of watching eyes. The Chen children had done well today. Little Mary had read an entire sentence without help, but the victory felt hollow. The path wound downhill through sparse pines. She'd never come this way before, had kept to the main streets where a woman alone was relatively safe. But tonight, the thought of returning to her tiny room, to the sounds of other people's lives through thin walls, was unbearable. That's when she saw it, a cabin tucked into the hillside, warm light spilling from its window like honey. Smoke rose from the chimney, straight up in the still air. Something about the scene pulled at her, the isolated peace of it, the way it sat apart from the town's judgment. She was still standing there, lost in thought, when the door opened. "Miss Corbin," she startled, recognizing the gravelly voice before she could make out the figure in the doorway. Calder Holt stepped onto the small porch, silhouetted against the interior light. "Mr. Holt, I apologize. I was walking and didn't realize." "No need to apologize. Just surprised to see anyone out here." He studied her in that quiet way he had, taking in her old shawl, her worn boots, the defeat she couldn't quite hide. "You look half frozen. Come in and warm up." She should refuse. She'd already spent 1 night in his cabin, and that had been necessity. This would be choice, and choice implied things a woman in her position couldn't afford to imply. "Just for a moment," she heard herself say. The cabin was exactly as she remembered, neat, sparse, but somehow welcoming. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of coffee mixed with something else. Books, she realized, the particular scent of well-read pages. Coffee Calder was already at the stove. Or I might have tea somewhere. Coffee's fine. She moved to the fire, holding her hands toward the warmth. On the table, she noticed an open book, a slate with carefully formed letters. You're practicing writing. His shoulders tensed slightly. She looked closer, recognizing the basic exercises she used with beginning students. The letters were painstaking. Clearly the work of someone unused to holding a pencil. If you ever want help... I manage. His voice was flat, closing off the topic. Eliza stepped back, embarrassed by her presumption. Of course he wouldn't want help from her. Why would anyone in this town? He handed her the coffee, and their fingers brushed. His hands were warm, calloused, steady. Hers trembled slightly, though whether from cold or something else, she couldn't say. Heard you've been teaching the Chen children, he said, settling into a chair by the fire. He gestured for her to take the other one. Among others. She sat carefully, aware of the impropriety but too tired to care. Though I lost a student today. Brennan's boy. She looked at him, surprised. How did you... Copper Ridge is small. Word travels. He took a sip of coffee, his gaze on the fire. Tom Brennan's a fool, but his wife knows it. She'll work on him. The boy might be back. And if he's not? Calder shrugged. Then he misses out on learning? His loss, not yours. It's $3 a week. That's my loss, too. Money's not nothing. He agreed. But it's not everything either. You're still teaching, still doing what you came here to do, even if it's not how you planned. Eliza stared into her cup. Is that enough scraping by? Teaching in secret like I'm doing something shameful? Nothing shameful in teaching. Tell that to Mrs. Walsh. Tell that to the men who think I'm too much for their children. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to let the bitterness leak through, but something about the firelight, the quiet cabin, his steady presence, made her guards drop. Calder was quiet for a long moment. Then, first time I came to Copper Ridge, I got work at the Mines Forge. Good money, steady work. But the owner took one look at my hands and said they were wrong for the job. Eliza glanced at his hands. Saw nothing wrong with them. He noticed her look and flexed his left hand. The movement was stiff, 2 fingers not bending quite right. Broke them working railroad, healed wrong, still work fine, but they don't look right. Owner said customers would think less of his operation, having a crippled blacksmith. That's ridiculous. That's what I thought. But he owned the forge. Calder leaned back in his chair. So I bought my own tools. Set up down here where rent was cheap. Take work where I can find it. Not what I planned, but it's enough. Do you miss it, the steady work? Sometimes, but I like the quiet. Like choosing my own jobs. He paused. Like being able to offer shelter to school teachers caught in storms. The words hung between them, weighted with something Eliza couldn't quite name. She became acutely aware of their proximity, of the intimacy of firelight and shared confessions. I should go, she said, though she didn't move. Storm's coming in, can smell it on the wind. She listened, but heard nothing beyond the fire's crackle. How can you tell? Live here long enough, you learn. He stood, moved to the window. See already starting? She joined him, careful to leave appropriate distance between them. Sure enough, fat snowflakes had begun falling, visible in the light spilling from the window. I can make it back before it gets bad, she said. Maybe, maybe not. He turned from the window. Stay for supper at least. Got stew that's been cooking all day. Too much for one person. She should refuse. Should march back up the hill to her proper room above the properly married Chen family. But the smell of the stew was making her stomach clench. She'd been stretching her money by eating less, and the thought of the cold walk back made her bones ache. "Just supper," she said. He ladled stew into 2 bowls, venison and vegetables, rich and warming. They ate in companionable silence, the snow falling harder outside. Eliza found herself relaxing, the knots in her shoulders loosening. When was the last time she'd shared a meal with someone who didn't watch her with suspicion or pity? "Can I ask you something?" Calder said eventually. She tensed. "All right." "Why teaching? You're educated, smart. Could do other things." "Like what? Be a secretary, a shop girl?" She shook her head. "I tried those. Always the same story, too tall, too intimidating, not decorative enough for the front office. Teaching was the only profession where my height was sometimes an advantage. Easier to maintain order when you can look the oldest boys in the eye. But you could have married, set up house somewhere." The old pain twisted. Could I? What man wants a wife who towers over him, who has opinions and education and refuses to pretend otherwise? She set down her spoon harder than necessary. "I had one proposal when I was 19. A widower with 4 children who needed a housekeeper he wouldn't have to pay. He told me I should be grateful for the offer, considering I chose teaching instead." "Good choice." She looked at him, startled by the vehemence in his voice. Man who thinks a woman should be grateful just for being offered his name isn't worth having. He continued, "You deserve better than that." "Do I? Sometimes I wonder if everyone else is right. If I should have made myself smaller, quieter, less—" "Don't!" The word came out sharp. Calder ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its usual order. "Sorry. Just don't do that to yourself. Seen too many people try to fit into spaces too small for them. Breaks something inside." Eliza studied his profile in the firelight, the scar through his eyebrow, the lines that suggested both laughter and pain. "Is that what happened to you trying to fit?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, railroad wanted a hero. Newspaper men came around after the accident, wanted to write up how I saved those people. But I couldn't remember it right. Couldn't give them the story they wanted. So they made up their own version. And I had to smile and nod like it was true. "What really happened?" "Bridge collapsed. I pulled some folks out of the water. Hurt my hands, my back. Nothing heroic about it, just closer than anyone else." He stared at the fire. "But they needed a story. So they made me one. Brave foreman risks life for passengers. Got medals, job offers, even a letter from the governor. All for being someone I wasn't." "So you left?" "So I left. Came here where nobody knew the story. Where I could just be another man who works with his hands." He looked at her then, his dark eyes serious. "We all got our reasons for running to the edge of nowhere. Yours are as good as mine." The snow was falling thick now, wind blown against the windows. Eliza knew she should leave, but something held her there. Maybe it was the understanding in his voice, the way he didn't try to fix or dismiss her struggles. Or maybe it was simpler, the warmth, the food, the peace of not being watched and found wanting. "I had such plans," she said softly. "A real classroom, books and maps and a globe for geography. Children eager to learn. Respect." She laughed, but it came out cracked. "Instead, I'm teaching in kitchens and parlors, begging for students, counting pennies. And still they think I'm too much." "Their thinking doesn't make it true. Doesn't it if the whole world says the sky is green? Does it matter that I see blue?" Calder leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Yes, it matters. Maybe not to them, but to you. To the children you're teaching. To anyone with eyes to see true." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "You sound very certain." "I am." He held her gaze. "Saw you that first night on the platform. Saw them trying to make you small. And saw you refuse. That matters." Heat crept up her neck that had nothing to do with the fire. "I was terrified." Didn't show, just looked like someone who knew her worth, even if others couldn't see it. They sat in charged silence, the space between them feeling both too large and too small. Eliza became aware of details, the way firelight caught in his hair, the careful stillness of his hands, the rise and fall of his breathing. A log shifted in the fire, breaking the moment. She stood abruptly. "I should go. Thank you for supper." He rose too, moving to the window. "Can't see the path anymore. Snow's too thick." She looked out, seeing only swirling white. Her heart sank. "I can't stay here again. People already talk." "There's talk anyway. Always is." He turned from the window. "But if you're worried about it, I'll walk you back. Just need to get my coat." The thought of him trudging through the storm for her sake, then having to make his way back alone, seemed worse than staying. And underneath the propriety concerns, a traitorous part of her wanted to stay, wanted more of this unexpected understanding. "No," she said. "No, you're right. It's foolish to go out in this." She tried for a light tone. "Though I'm claiming the chair this time. That cot nearly broke my back." His lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Fair enough. I'll take the floor." "You will not. It's your home." She moved to the chair by the fire, testing its comfort. "This is perfectly adequate." He looked like he might argue, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. Let me get you a blanket." As he rummaged in a trunk, Eliza settled into the chair. It was more comfortable than her narrow bed above the laundry. Truth be told, the fire warmed her face, and exhaustion pulled at her bones. "Here." Calder draped a thick wool blanket around her shoulders. His hands lingered just a moment, making sure it was secure. "Should keep you warm enough." "Thank you." The words came out softer than intended. He banked the fire, blew out the oil lamp, and settled onto the cot. The cabin fell into darkness, broken only by ember glow. Outside, the wind howled, but inside was an island of quiet. Calder. His name felt strange on her tongue, too familiar. Why did you help me that first night, really?" Bed springs creaked as he shifted. "You reminded me of someone." "Who?" "Myself. The night I left Pennsylvania, standing on a platform. Everything I owned in one bag. Knowing I couldn't go back, but not sure I could go forward either." Eliza pulled the blanket tighter. "Did it get easier?" "Different. Not easier, but different." His voice was drowsy now. "Found reasons to stay. Work, quiet, good coffee." She smiled in the darkness. "Those are good reasons." "What are yours for staying?" She thought about it. Stubbornness, mostly. And the children. Mary Chen read a whole sentence today. "Good reason." They fell quiet. Eliza listened to the storm, to the settling of the cabin, to Calder's breathing evening out into sleep. She should feel ashamed, spending another night in this man's home. Should worry about her reputation, her future, the talk that would surely follow. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Missouri safe. Not just from the storm, or the cold, or the Tom Brennans of the world. Safe to be herself. Too tall and too educated and too much of everything. Tomorrow she'd go back to the careful dance of survival in a town that didn't want her. But tonight, she could rest. The fire burned low, and snow piled against the windows. And somewhere in the darkness, a man who understood too much slept peacefully. Eliza closed her eyes and let the storm sing her to sleep, dreaming of sentences read and small victories won, and the way firelight looked in dark hair. First night, one blanket, two distances. Eliza woke to the sound of wood being added to the fire. For a moment, confusion held her the chair, the unfamiliar angle of morning light, the smell of coffee already brewing. Then memory returned. The storm, Calder's cabin, another night where she'd chosen warmth over propriety. "Morning," Calder said without turning from the stove. "Coffee's almost ready." She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. The blanket had slipped during the night, and she quickly adjusted it, though he kept his back politely turned. Through the window, she could see the storm had left another foot of snow, the world outside pristine and glittering. I should go, she said, her voice rough with sleep, before anyone notices I'm missing. Trail's not broken yet. Give it an hour. Let me clear a path. He poured coffee into 2 cups, set one on the table near her, then retreated to his own side of the room, always careful about distance. She noticed, always maintaining the boundaries that kept this acceptable. She stood, folding the blanket with precise movements. Her hair had come loose during the night, pins scattered. She gathered them, trying to restore some semblance of order. There's water in the basin, he said, and a comb on the shelf, if you need it. The small kindness made her throat tight. When did she last experience such simple consideration? She washed her face, repinned her hair, tried to smooth the wrinkles from her dress. In the small mirror above the basin, she looked tired but not defeated. That was something. When she emerged from behind the curtain that sectioned off the washing area, Calder was pulling on his boots. I can manage the walk, she said. You don't need to. Not going to let you wade through 3 feet of snow alone. His tone brooked no argument. Besides, need to check on the widow Morrison. Promised I'd clear her path after storms. They set out together, Calder breaking trail while Eliza followed in his footsteps. The sun was brilliant on fresh snow, the air so cold it hurt to breathe, but clean. Everything clean and new. Last night's intimacy crystallized into something safer by daylight and distance. They didn't speak until they reached the edge of town. Then Calder stopped, turning to face her. About last night, he began. You were kind to offer shelter, she said quickly. Anyone would have done the same. Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment. Relief. Right. Anyone would have. He touched his hat brim. Take care, Miss Corbin. She watched him head toward the Morrison place, his broad shoulders set against the cold. Then she hurried toward the laundry, hoping to slip in unnoticed. No such luck, Mrs. Chen was hanging wash in the heated drying room, and her sharp eyes took in Eliza's rumpled appearance, the snow on her hem. Bad storm last night, was all she said. Tea is hot, rice on the stove. Eliza escaped to her room, closing the door and leaning against it. What was she doing? She'd worked so hard to build a respectable life here, and now she was risking it all for what? A few hours of understanding, a warm fire and actual conversation. She changed into her good dress, the brown wool that made her look serious and teacherly. Sarah Garrett would arrive soon for her lesson, then the Chen children after lunch. Back to the careful routine that kept her fed and housed. But throughout the day, her mind wandered, to firelight on scarred hands, to the way he'd said her name in the darkness, to the space between the chair and the cot, carefully maintained but somehow still electric. Sarah was struggling with her reading, sounding out each word with painful precision. Eliza forced herself to focus, to be the patient teacher the girl needed. But when Sarah left, Eliza found herself staring out the window toward the hills where a cabin sat alone. That evening, as she prepared lessons by lamplight, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Lucy Walsh, pink-cheeked and breathless. I have news, the girl said, slipping inside. Good and bad. Eliza's stomach tightened. Tell me. The good 3 more families want to hire you. The Andersons, the Millers, and even the Youngbloods. That's another $8 a week if you can fit them in. Relief washed through her. With that money, she could save a little, maybe even afford better winter boots. And the bad, Lucy's face fell. Aunt Prudence knows you stayed somewhere else last night. She's telling everyone you're... She paused, clearly editing. That you're not maintaining proper standards for someone who teaches children. Heat flooded Eliza's face. How could she possibly... Tom Brennan saw you walking with Mr. Holt this morning. He told everyone at the saloon, and it got back to Aunt Prudence. Lucy twisted her hands. She's saying she'll make sure no respectable family hires you. Eliza sank onto her narrow bed. 1 night, 2, technically, But the first had been clearly emergency shelter. This second time, though. "It's not fair," Lucy said fiercely. "Mr. Holt is a good man. Everyone knows that. And it was a storm." "Fair doesn't matter." Eliza's voice came out flat. "Appearance does. Reputation does. So what will you do?" What could she do? Pack up and leave, let Prudence Walsh win? The thought made her angry. And anger was better than despair. "I'll teach whoever will have me," she said. "And I'll be so good at it that even your aunt can't deny the results." Lucy smiled tremulously. "I'll help. I'll tell everyone the truth, that Mr. Holt was just being kind, that nothing improper happened." After Lucy left, Eliza sat in the lamplight, thinking. She'd been so careful, so proper, and still they found reasons to condemn her. Maybe that was the lesson, that she'd never be proper enough for people determined to find fault. The next few days passed in a blur of lessons and worried looks. Some families kept their appointments. Others canceled with thin excuses. The Anderson job materialized, but the Millers suddenly decided they couldn't afford tutoring after all. Eliza's careful budget calculations crumbled. Friday evening found her with $6 in her pocket and rent due in 3 days. She'd eaten nothing but rice and tea for 2 days, saving every penny. Her good dress was wearing thin at the elbows, but she couldn't afford to replace it. She was bent over the Chen children's exercises, correcting their work by failing light, when Mary tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Eliza, why are you sad?" "I'm not sad," Eliza said automatically. "I'm concentrating." "You look like Mama when she's worried about money." The child's directness cut through all pretense. "Sometimes adults have things to figure out," Eliza said gently. "But that's not for you to worry about." That night, she lay awake calculating. If she gave up breakfast, if she walked to lessons instead of paying for coal to heat her room, if she mended her boots one more time instead of replacing them. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. She opened the door to find Mrs. Chen holding a bundle. "For you," the woman said, pressing it into Eliza's hands. "My cousin in San Francisco sends fabric. Too much for us." Inside was good wool, dark blue, enough for a dress. Eliza's eyes burned. "I can't." "You can. You teach my children like they matter. That's worth more than fabric." Mrs. Chen patted her hand. "We help each other. That's how we survive here." After the door closed, Eliza held the fabric to her chest and let a few tears fall. Kindness when you least expected it. Maybe that was enough to keep going. Saturday brought a surprise. Daniel Brennan appeared at her door, hat in hand, looking miserable. "Ma says I can come back," he mumbled. "If you'll have me." "What about your father?" The boy's face darkened. "He doesn't need to know. Ma's paying from her egg money." Eliza should have refused, should have protected herself from more conflict with Tom Brennan. Instead, she stepped aside. "Come in. We have work to catch up on." The boy's relief was palpable. As they worked through his arithmetic, he suddenly said, "Pa's wrong about you. You're a good teacher. Better than Mr. Walsh." "How do you know about Mr. Walsh's teaching?" Daniel snorted. "He just has us copy from books all day. Doesn't explain nothing. Harold Miller fell asleep yesterday, and Mr. Walsh didn't even notice." "Interesting." Eliza filed that information away. "Well, you're not falling asleep on my watch. Now, let's try this problem again." By the time Daniel left, some of her equilibrium had returned. She had students who needed her. She had unexpected allies. She had fabric for a new dress and a roof over her head, at least for now. That evening, restless energy drove her out walking again. She told herself she wasn't heading anywhere in particular, but her feet found the path downhill without conscious direction. The cabin light glowed in the distance, a warm beacon in the early dark. She stopped well before reaching it, standing among the pines. What was she doing? What did she hope to accomplish? Calder had made his position clear. Anyone would have offered shelter. The connection she'd felt was probably one-sided. her lonely heart reading too much into simple kindness. She was about to turn back when the cabin door opened. Calder emerged, carrying an armload of wood. He paused, looking directly at where she stood half hidden by trees. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the snowy distance. Then he raised one hand in greeting and went back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. An invitation. A coincidence. Eliza stood frozen with indecision. "Go back," the sensible part of her urged. "You've already risked too much." But the other part, the part that was tired of being sensible, tired of measuring every action against the town's judgment, took a step forward, then another. She knocked at the partially open door. "It's Eliza. Miss Corbin, come in before you freeze." She entered to find him adding wood to the fire, not looking at her. "I was just walking," she said, feeling foolish. "I didn't mean to intrude." "Not intruding." He straightened, finally meeting her eyes. "Was hoping you'd come by, actually." Her heart stuttered. "Oh." He moved to the table, picking up a piece of paper. "Got a proposition for you. Business proposition." He added quickly, "Been thinking about what you said, about teaching. I never learned proper. Had to leave school young. Worked the railroad. Picked up enough to get by, but you want lessons? If you'd consider it. Can pay $2 a week. No, it's not much, but—" "Yes," the word came out too quickly, too eager. I'd be happy to help." Something in his face relaxed. "Good. That's good." He gestured to the chairs by the fire. "Stay for coffee. We can work out the details." She should refuse. Should keep this purely professional. But she was already moving toward the warmth, already settling into what was becoming her chair. "People are talking," she said quietly. "About that morning, about us." "I know." He poured coffee, his movements careful and deliberate. "I'm sorry for that. Should have thought about how it would look." "It's not your fault. You were being kind." "Kindness can be complicated here." He handed her the cup, their fingers brushing. "But I don't regret it." The words hung between them, weighted with more than their surface meaning. Eliza stared into her coffee, searching for safe ground. "When would you like to start lessons?" "Whenever suits you. Evenings work best. I'm usually done with forge work by dark." "Mondays and Thursdays, after my last student." "Sounds fine." They discussed details, what materials they'd use, what he hoped to learn. Professional conversation, safe and appropriate. But underneath ran an awareness, a tension like the air before lightning. "I should go," Eliza said eventually. "It's getting late." "I'll walk you back." "No?" The word came out sharper than intended. That would just give them more to talk about." He nodded slowly. "You're right, but take this." He handed her a lantern. "Leave it by your door. I'll get it next time I'm in town." It was practical, sensible, so why did it feel like accepting so much more? She took the lantern, careful not to let their hands touch this time. "Thank you. I'll see you Monday." "Monday," he agreed. The walk back was easier with the lantern's light. Eliza's mind churned with equal parts anticipation and worry. Another student meant financial breathing room, but it also meant regular contact with Calder, meant more opportunities for the town to talk, meant navigating whatever this was between them. She left the lantern by her door as instructed and climbed to her room. Through her small window, she could see the distant glow of his cabin. Monday seemed very far away and entirely too close. That night, she lay on her narrow bed, one thin blanket pulled to her chin, and remembered another night. A chair by the fire, a cot across the room, and the careful distance between them that somehow sparked with more possibility than any closeness she'd known. "This is really your first night here?" he'd asked that first time, and she'd been too tired and cold to hear the layers in the question. Now she wondered, first night in his cabin? Yes, but maybe he'd meant something more. First night of letting someone see her without the armor of propriety? First night of being too much and having someone find it just enough. Monday, she told herself. Monday, she'd be professional and distant. Monday, she'd teach letters and nothing more. But tonight, she let herself remember the warmth of 2 cups of coffee, 2 chairs by the fire, and 2 people maintaining a careful distance that felt more intimate than any touch. A woman who won't shrink. Monday evening arrived with fresh snow and nervous energy. Eliza had changed her dress twice before settling on the brown wool professional. Serious. Nothing that could be misconstrued. She packed her teaching materials carefully, a primer, slate and chalk, paper precious as gold. The walk to Calder's cabin felt longer than usual. Every shadow might hide watching eyes. Every sound might be someone noting her direction. But she kept her head high, her stride steady. She was a teacher visiting a student, nothing more. Calder answered her knock immediately. As if he'd been waiting, he'd cleared the table, set out 2 chairs at a careful distance, arranged a lamp for good light, everything proper and correct, except for the awareness that thrummed between them. Evening, Miss Corbin. Mr. Holt. She set her materials on the table, businesslike. Shall we begin? They started with basics, holding the pencil correctly, forming letters. His hands, so sure with hammer and iron, trembled slightly with the unfamiliar tool. Eliza watched him struggle with the curves of an S, his brow furrowed in concentration. Here, she said, moving her chair closer. Think of it like shaping metal, the same smooth motion. She demonstrated, her hand guiding his. The touch was brief, pedagogical, but warmth spread from the contact point like ripples in water. Like this, he tried again, the letter emerging cleaner. Better, much better. They worked through the alphabet, Eliza patient, Calder determined. She'd taught dozens of students, but something about his focused intensity, his refusal to be embarrassed by struggle, made her chest tight. Why now? She asked during a break. Why learn after all this time? He set down the pencil, flexing his cramped fingers. Got tired of pretending, signing contracts with an ex, having others read letters for me. He paused. Made me dependent on their honesty. Were they not honest? Most were, some weren't. His jaw tightened. Lost a good contract once because I couldn't read the changes they made. Learned to be careful after that, but careful isn't the same as capable. Eliza understood. How many times had she been dependent on others' goodwill? How often had that dependence been used against her? We'll make you capable, she said firmly. You're already a quick learner. They returned to work, and time slipped away. The lamp oil burned low. The fire settled to embers, and still they continued. Calder's letters grew steadier, more confident. When he successfully wrote his full name, Calder James Holt, his rare smile transformed his face. I did it. You did. Eliza found herself smiling back. By spring, you'll be reading contracts yourself. That's the plan. He stood, stretching. Coffee, you must be tired. She should refuse, should leave now while the lesson's formal structure still protected them. Coffee would be welcome. As he prepared it, Eliza tidied the materials, trying not to watch the efficient grace of his movements. This was dangerous territory. She knew it, and yet... Can I ask you something? Calder said, his back to her. Of course. That morning, walking back to town, you seemed disappointed when I agreed anyone would have helped you. Heat flooded her cheeks. I don't know what you mean. He turned, 2 cups in hand. I think you do. They stood frozen, the table between them, truth hanging unspoken. Then a loud knock shattered the moment. Holt, open up. Eliza recognized Tom Brennan's voice, slurred with drink. Her stomach dropped. Calder set the cups down carefully. Stay back, he murmured. Then louder, it's late, Brennan. Not too late for lessons, apparently. The door shook under his fist. Got your student in there teaching her letters? Go home, Tom. You're drunk. Maybe I am, but at least I'm not pretending to be something I ain't. A pause. Neither of you are fooling anyone. Woman like that, man living alone, we all know what kind of lessons are happening. Eliza's hands clenched. Before Calder could respond, she strode to the door and yanked it open. Tom Brennan stood swaying on the porch, 2 other men behind him. His eyes widened at her sudden appearance. Mr. Brennan, she said, her teacher voice sharp as winter air. Your son made excellent progress today. He solved 3 arithmetic problems that have challenged him for weeks. I thought you'd want to know, since you're so concerned about his education. Confusion flickered across his face. Daniel wasn't here. Not here. At his lessons this afternoon, which you'd know if you paid attention to your son instead of to gossip. She stepped forward, using her height advantage. Now, I'm attempting to teach Mr. Holt to read a skill your son already possesses thanks to his mother's wisdom in continuing his education. If you have concerns about my teaching methods, schedule an appointment during business hours. You can't talk to me like... I'm talking to you exactly as I'd talk to any parent who interrupted a lesson. She kept her voice level, professional. Good evening, Mr. Brennan. She stepped back and closed the door firmly. Through the wood, she heard muffled conversation, then retreating footsteps. When she turned, Calder was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. I'm sorry, she began. Don't. He moved closer, still careful not to touch. That was... Nobody's ever defended me before. You were defending me first. That's different. Why? He seemed to struggle for words. I'm used to handling things alone. Having someone else step up, especially for me, I don't know what to do with that. You could say thank you. Thank you. The words came out rough. But you know this will make things worse. Brennan won't let this go. Let him talk. Eliza surprised herself with the vehemence. I'm tired of shrinking, tired of apologizing for existing. If they want to gossip, they'll gossip whether I hide or not. Brave words. Necessary words. She gathered her materials, hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline faded. I should go before he comes back. Eliza. Her name on his lips stopped her. This isn't what I wanted, causing you more trouble. You didn't cause anything. I chose to come here, chose to take you as a student. She met his eyes. I don't regret it. Neither do I. The walk back was tense, every shadow potentially hiding watchers. But Eliza kept her spine straight, her pace measured. Let them see, let them judge. She was teaching a man to read. Nothing more. If they wanted to make it scandalous, that was their failing, not hers. The next morning brought consequences. Misses. Chen was apologetic but firm. She couldn't risk her business by housing someone of questionable reputation. The room above the laundry was needed for family. Eliza packed her few belongings with numb fingers. Where would she go? The hotel wouldn't take her, not after Mrs. Walsh's poison had spread. The boarding house was for men only. She was sitting on her trunk in the street, calculating how far $40 would take her, when Lucy Walsh appeared. This is awful, the girl said, tears in her eyes. It's so unfair. Life often is. Eliza managed a smile. Don't cry. You'll ruin your reputation being seen with me. I don't care. Lucy sat beside her on the trunk. Aunt Prudence is wrong. Everyone knows she's just jealous because Theodore is a terrible teacher and the children are already asking for you instead. Small comfort, but Eliza appreciated it. Thank you for saying so. What will you do? Before Eliza could answer, a wagon pulled up. Calder sat on the bench, his face carefully neutral. Miss Corbin, heard you might need help moving. I don't have anywhere to move to. About that. He climbed down, avoiding her eyes. The widow Morrison has a room, tiny thing, barely a closet. But it's warm and she's willing to rent to you. Hope flared.
Really?
She's also half-deaf and doesn't give a damn what Prudence Walsh thinks. He loaded her trunk onto the wagon. If you're interested.
Yes, of course.
Lucy squeezed her hand. I'll keep sending students your way, quietly. As Calder helped her onto the wagon seat, his hand lingered just a moment. You all right?
I will be.
They rode through town in broad daylight, Eliza refusing to hide, Calder solid beside her. People stared, whispered, pointed. Let them. She'd been driven from her room for the crime of teaching letters. If that made her scandalous, she'd wear the label proudly. The widow Morrison was ancient, sharp, and delightfully irreverent. So, you're the giant teacher everyone's fussing about, she said, peering up at Eliza through thick spectacles. Good. This town needs shaking up. The room was indeed tiny, barely space for a bed and washstand, but it was clean, private, and affordable. Eliza could have wept with relief. Thank you, she told Calder as he carried up her trunk. Again. Stop thanking me. He paused in the doorway. We still have lessons Thursday. If you still want them. His look said more than words could. I want them. After he left, Eliza unpacked in her new space. Through the small window, she could see the mountains, the endless sky. Not the life she'd planned, but perhaps the one she needed. That evening, as she prepared lessons for tomorrow's students, loyal souls who valued education over gossip, she thought about transformation. Calder learning letters, children discovering worlds in books, herself finding strength she hadn't known existed. She'd come to Copperidge expecting to shrink herself into an acceptable shape. Instead, she was expanding, taking up space, refusing to apologize for it. It terrified her. It thrilled her. Thursday's lesson went smoothly, despite everything. Calder had practiced, his letters growing more confident. They worked on simple words, cat, dog, son. Each success lit his face in ways that made Eliza's heart race. You're a good teacher, he said as she packed up. Patient, clear, kind. You're a good student, determined, focused, brave. Brave, he laughed, short and sharp. For learning to read, for admitting you need to, for letting someone see you struggle. She met his eyes. That's its own kind of courage. He walked her to the door, then surprised her by stepping onto the porch with her, in full view of anyone watching. He said, Same time next week. Same time. Good. He paused, then added louder, Thank you for the lessons. Miss Corbin, my reading is already improving. She understood he was making their arrangement public, removing the secrecy that fed gossip. You're welcome, Mr. Holt. Practice your words this week. Walking back to the Morrison house, Eliza felt lighter. Yes, people stared. Yes, whispers followed her. But she also received 3 nods of acknowledgement. One wave from a mother whose child she tutored, and a tip of the hat from the pastor. Not everyone believed Prudence Walsh's poison. Not everyone needed her to shrink. That night, in her tiny room, Eliza wrote in her journal, I am learning that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's continuing despite it. Each day I choose not to hide is a victory. Each lesson taught, each student who progresses, each moment I refuse to apologize for my existence adds up to something larger. They wanted me to shrink. Instead, I'm taking root. Outside her window, snow began to fall again. But Eliza felt warm, purposeful, alive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did. But tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be, too tall, too educated, too much. And finally, enough. Town gossip and the widow's smirk. December arrived with bitter winds and escalating whispers. Eliza had settled into her routine at the Morrison house, teaching during the day, preparing lessons by lamplight, ignoring the looks that followed her through town. Her students were progressing remarkably. Even Daniel Brennan had started reading simple sentences. his face lighting up with each success. But success, she learned, could be its own kind of problem in Copper Ridge. "That woman thinks she's too good for us," Prudence Walsh declared loudly in the Mercantile, knowing full well Eliza was selecting writing paper 2 aisles over. Living with the widow Morrison, visiting that hermit Holt twice a week. No decent woman would carry on so. Eliza kept her eyes on the paper, testing its weight between her fingers. Good quality for the price. Her students deserved the best she could afford. "And I heard," Prudence continued, her voice carrying deliberately, "that she's filling the children's heads with dangerous ideas, teaching the girls mathematics alongside the boys, encouraging them to question their betters. My Sarah's never been happier." "Mrs. Garrett interrupted quietly. "She actually enjoys her lessons now." "Enjoys," Prudence sniffed. "Education isn't meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to instill discipline and proper values." Eliza selected her paper and approached the counter. The store fell silent, all eyes on her. Theodore Walsh emerged from the back room, smirking. His soft face still held traces of childhood, though he must have been 25. "Miss Corbin," he drawled, "how are your private lessons going?" The emphasis he placed on private was unmistakable. Eliza set her paper on the counter with precise movements. "Quite well. Mr. Walsh, young Mary Chen read her first full page yesterday. Daniel Brennan has mastered long division. Sarah Garrett wrote a lovely composition about the mountains." She smiled pleasantly. "How are your students progressing?" His face reddened. "The public school maintains appropriate standards." "I'm sure it does." She counted out exact change. "Though I heard the Morrison twins fell asleep during geography yesterday. Perhaps the subject matter wasn't engaging enough." "How dare you?" "I dare because I care about education." Eliza kept her voice level. "If you'll excuse me, I have students waiting." She left with her paper, back straight, but heard Prudence's parting shot. "Mark my words, that woman will bring scandal to this town. No good comes from females who don't know their place." Outside, Eliza nearly collided with Martha Brennan. Tom's wife looked exhausted, worn thin by winter and worry. "Miss Corbin," Martha said quietly, "I wanted to thank you. Daniel's like a different boy. Actually wants to learn now. He's a bright child. He just needed someone to believe in him." Martha glanced around nervously. "Tom doesn't know I'm talking to you. He's still angry about that night. Says you humiliated him." "I simply told him the truth about his son's progress. Truth isn't always welcome in the Brennan house." Martha's laugh held no humor. "But I wanted you to know, not everyone believes the gossip. Some of us see what you're doing for our children." "Thank you. That means more than you know." Martha hurried away, but the brief kindness warmed Eliza through her afternoon lessons. She was teaching at the Garrett house when another reminder of the town's divided opinion arrived. A rock crashed through the parlor window, glass scattering across Sarah's carefully written exercises. The girl screamed, "Mrs." Garrett went white, and Eliza immediately pushed Sarah away from the windows. "Stay down," she ordered, moving cautiously to peer outside. 3 boys, perhaps 14 or 15, stood in the street laughing. She recognized one Theodore Walsh's pet student, Harold Miller. "That's for thinking you're better than us," Harold shouted. "Ugly giant, go back where you came from!" "Mrs." Garrett was shaking, Sarah crying. Eliza's hands clenched, but she forced calm into her voice. "Sarah, go to the kitchen with your mother, now." Once they were safe, Eliza stepped onto the porch. The boys' laughter died at her appearance. "Harold Miller," she said, her teacher voice cutting through the cold air. "William Youngblood, James Walsh." They shifted uneasily. James Theodore's younger brother looked ready to run. "I know your parents," she continued. "I know where you live, and I know you're old enough to understand consequences." "You can't do nothing," Harold blustered. You're not even a real teacher. No, I'm not your teacher, which means I'm not bound by school rules. She descended the steps slowly. I'm just a citizen whose property was damaged by vandals. The sheriff takes a dim view of such things. You wouldn't try me. She stopped just out of reach, using her height to full advantage. Or you can clean up this glass, apologize to Mrs. Garrett, and pay for the window from your wages. Your choice. The boys exchanged glances, pride warred with fear on their faces. Finally, James broke. We'll clean it up, he mumbled. And apologize. And pay for the window. They nodded miserably. Eliza supervised as they gathered glass, offered stilted apologies, and pooled their coins. Not enough for a full window, but she'd make up the difference quietly. After they slunk away, Mrs. Garrett touched her arm. You handled that remarkably. I've dealt with difficult students before, though never quite like this. Never with such naked hatred for the simple crime of existing. That evening, exhausted and disheartened, Eliza almost canceled Calder's lesson, but routine held power, and she found herself walking the familiar path as dusk gathered. He answered immediately, taking in her pale face and tense shoulders. What happened? Nothing, just a long day. Eliza, just her name, but weighted with concern. She found herself telling him about the rock, the boys, the constant barrage of whispers and stares. He listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. This is my fault, he said when she finished. If I hadn't asked for lessons... Stop! She sank into her usual chair. They hated me before you asked for lessons. You just gave them an excuse to show it. Then let me talk to them. Make them understand. Make them understand that I'm worthy of basic respect, that I deserve to earn a living. She laughed bitterly. If they can't see that themselves, your words won't convince them. He poured coffee, handed her a cup, then surprised her by sitting on the floor near her chair instead of taking his own seat. So, what do? I keep teaching, keep proving them wrong. She stared into the dark liquid. Or I give up, leave, let them win. You won't leave. How do you know? Because you're stubborn, because those children need you, because... He stopped, seeming to catch himself. Because... He looked up at her, firelight catching in his dark eyes. Because I need you to stay. The words hung between them, too honest for comfort. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Calder. I know. He turned back to the fire. I know we can't. I know what this town would do. But I need you to know that someone wants you here. Not despite what you are, but because of it. Tears burned her eyes. When did anyone last want her for herself? Not smaller, not quieter, not less, just her. We should do your lesson, she managed. Right, the lesson. They worked through new words, simple sentences, but the air had changed between them. Every brush of fingers as she corrected his grip, every shared glance over the primer, carried weight. When he successfully read a full paragraph about, of all things, a farmer's faithful dog, his triumph felt like hers. I did it, he said, wonder in his voice. I read it all. You did. You're progressing so quickly. Good teacher, he said simply. Good student. They smiled at each other, the moment stretching. Then reality crashed back. She was an unmarried woman in a bachelor's cabin at night. He was already considered odd for his solitary ways. Together, they were fodder for every gossip in town. I should go, she said, standing. I know. He stood too, moving to get her coat. As he helped her into it, his hands lingered on her shoulders. Eliza, if the town gets too cruel, if you need, I know where to find you. She turned to face him, memorizing his face in the firelight. Thank you for listening, for everything. Thursday. The walk back was cold and lonely, but as she reached the Morrison house, she found the widow waiting on the porch despite the late hour.
Heard about the window,
the old woman said without preamble.
Also heard you made those boys clean it up themselves. How did you... Girl, I may be half deaf, but I see everything.
Mrs. Morrison's wrinkled face split into a grin. About time someone stood up to those little hellions. Their parents spoiled them rotten. I probably made things worse.
Worse,
the widow cackled.
Child, they already hate you for being tall, smart, and unwilling to simper. Might as well be hated for being strong too.
Is that supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be true, Mrs. Morrison patted her arm.
Now, come inside. Made soup, and you look like you need it.
Over thin but hot soup, the widow shared gossip of her own. How several mothers had approached her about Eliza's teaching. How Theodore Walsh was struggling to maintain order in his classroom. How even some of Prudence's allies were beginning to question whether pride was worth their children's education. Change is slow in towns like this, Mrs. Morrison said, but it comes. You just have to outlast the fools. What if I can't? What if they wear me down first? The widow studied her with sharp eyes. You asking for permission to give up? No, maybe, I don't know.
Well, I'm not giving it. You want to leave, leave. But don't expect my blessing for quitting.
She leaned back in her chair.
Besides, that Holt boy would be devastated.
Heat flooded Eliza's face.
I don't know what you mean.
Course you don't. The widow's smirk was knowing. Just like you don't know he watches for you from his window. Like you don't know he started coming to town more often since you arrived. Like you don't know the way his face changes when someone mentions your name. Mrs. Morrison.
I'm old, not blind, and I've lived long enough to know that what's proper and what's right aren't always the same thing.
She patted Eliza's hand.
Just be careful, child. Hearts are easier to break than windows.
That night, Eliza lay in her narrow bed thinking about broken windows and broken hearts. About boys who threw rocks and men who offered shelter. About a town that hated her height but needed her mind. The gossip would continue. The whispers, the stares, the judgment all would persist. But so would she. Tomorrow she'd face Sarah Garrett's nervous smile, the Chen children's eager questions, even Daniel Brennan's stubborn resistance. And Thursday, she'd sit by another fire, teaching letters to a man who saw her truly. Whatever that meant, whatever it cost, it was worth more than the town's approval.
Let them gossip. Let Prudence Walsh spread her poison. Let Theodore smirk from behind his aunt's skirts.
Eliza had students to teach, minds to shape, a life to build on her own terms. If that made her scandalous, so be it. She'd been called worse things than improper. She'd been called too much. And finally, she was beginning to believe that might just be exactly enough. You think I'm not used to being alone. The blizzard struck on a Thursday evening, just as Eliza was preparing to leave for Calder's lesson. Within minutes, the world outside vanished into a wall of white. Wind screamed around the Morrison house, rattling windows and doors like something trying to get in. You're not going out in this, Mrs. Morrison declared, watching Eliza pull on her coat. Don't be foolish, girl.
It's just snow. I've walked in worse. This isn't just snow. This is a killer storm. Temperatures dropping fast enough to freeze you solid before you make it halfway.
The widow's face was serious. Calder's survived plenty of storms alone. He'll understand. Eliza hesitated, one arm in her coat, the rational part of her new missus. Morrison was right, but she thought of Calder waiting, materials laid out, lamp lit against the gathering dark. He'd practiced all week. She'd seen his careful letters when he paid for supplies at the mercantile, no longer signing with an X. I'll be careful, she said. You'll be dead is what you'll be. Mrs. Morrison moved between her and the door. Child, I've seen storms like this bury whole families. You stay put. The wind chose that moment to slam something heavy against the house. Both women jumped. Through the window, Eliza could see nothing but chaos, snow horizontal in the wind, the familiar world erased. She removed her coat slowly.
You're right. Of course you're right. Finally, some sense.
The widow settled back in her chair. Now, we waited out. Got wood for 3 days, food for longer. We'll be fine. But Eliza couldn't settle. She tried to read, to prepare tomorrow's lessons, to help Mrs. Morrison with her knitting. Nothing held her attention. Her thoughts kept returning to the cabin on the hillside, to Calder waiting with his careful letters and rare smiles. He knows I wouldn't come out in this, she said aloud. Course he does. Man's not stupid. Mrs. Morrison didn't look up from her knitting, though men do tend toward stupidity where women are concerned. What do you mean? I mean he might be out there right now, thinking you tried to come and got caught in the storm. The widow's eyes were too knowing. Might be pulling on his boots, thinking about searching. Eliza's stomach dropped. He wouldn't, would he? You tell me. What kind of man is Calder Holt? The kind who offered shelter to strangers, who defended her reputation even as it cost him his privacy, who looked at her like she was precious rather than too much. Oh no. Eliza was at the window again, peering uselessly into the white void. He'll freeze to death looking for me. Probably. Mrs. Morrison. What you want, pretty lies. The man's half in love with you. Anyone can see that. Course he'll risk himself. Love? The word hit Eliza like a physical blow. He's not, we're not. Aren't you? The widow set down her knitting. Child, I've lived through 3 husbands and 70 winters. I know what love looks like, proper or not. Eliza sank into a chair, legs suddenly unsteady. Love. Is that what this was? This constant awareness, this need to see him, to share small victories and daily frustrations. This feeling that she could breathe properly only in his presence. Even if, she stopped, started again. It doesn't matter what we feel. The town already thinks the worst. If we actually... The town thinks the worst anyway. Might as well have the joy to go with the judgment. It's not that simple. Love never is. That's what makes it worth having. They sat in silence, wind howling around them. Eliza thought about Calder out in this storm, searching for her, risking everything because he couldn't bear the thought of her hurt. The image was unbearable. I have to go, she said, standing. Sit down. Mrs. Morrison. Girl, you think dying in a blizzard will prove your love. All it proves is foolishness. The widow's voice gentled. If he's out there, he'll shelter somewhere. Man survived 7 years here. He knows how to weather a storm. Have faith. Faith. Eliza had faith in lesson plans, in children's capacity to learn, in her own stubborn refusal to quit, but faith in another person. Faith that someone would be all right without her managing it. That was harder. The storm raged through the night. Eliza dozed fitfully in the chair by the fire, starting awake at every sound that might be someone at the door. Mrs. Morrison snored peacefully, apparently unbothered by the possibility of frozen corpses in her vicinity. Dawn came gray and still. The wind had died, leaving behind a transformed world. Snow drifted halfway up the windows, and what Eliza could see beyond looked alien familiar landmarks erased, distances distorted. I'm going, she announced. Mrs. Morrison, making breakfast, nodded. Figured you would. Take the snowshoes from the shed, and this. She handed Eliza a flask. Whiskey, for medicinal purposes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait till you find him safe and give him the sharp edge of your tongue for worrying you. The journey that usually took 20 minutes stretched to an hour. Eliza fought through drifts, stumbled over hidden obstacles, lost the path twice. Her lungs burned with cold air. Her skirts were soaked despite her efforts to hold them high, But she pressed on, driven by an urgency she couldn't name. The cabin finally appeared, half buried but intact. No smoke from the chimney. Her heart seized. She pounded on the door. "Calder, Calder, are you there?" Nothing. She tried the latch unlocked. The door opened onto a cold, empty room, fire dead in the hearth, his coat gone from the peg. "No." The word came out as a whisper, then louder, "No!" She stumbled back outside, scanning the white expanse. He could be anywhere. Could have tried to reach town last night. Could be buried in a drift. Could be... Movement caught her eye. A figure emerging from the tree line, moving slowly through the deep snow. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a familiar duster. Calder. His head snapped up. Even at this distance, she could see his shock. Then he was moving faster, fighting through the drifts toward her. They met halfway, both breathing hard, steam rising from their exertion. "What are you doing here?" His voice was rough. "The storm. What were you doing out there?" He stopped, seeming to truly see her for the first time. Snow in her hair, her face flushed with cold and effort. "You're here. You're safe." "Of course I'm safe. I stayed with Mrs. Morrison." "Where were you?" Something shifted in his expression. "Checking the animals. The Hendersons' barn. Their oldest boy came by yesterday, worried about their stock. I promised I'd check after the storm." A lie. She could see it in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He'd been looking for her. "Calder, you must be freezing. Come inside." He led the way back to the cabin. Movements, careful. Inside. He immediately set about building a fire, all efficient motion. Eliza stood dripping on his clean floor, watching him avoid her gaze. "You went looking for me," she said quietly. His hand stilled on the kindling. "The Hendersons." "Don't." She moved closer. "Please don't lie to me." He stood slowly, turning to face her. In the dim light, his face looked haggard, older. "What do you want me to say, that I spent half the night terrified you'd tried to come here, that I nearly went out a dozen times but knew Mrs. Morrison would skin me alive if I got you killed trying to rescue you when you were safe all along?" "Yes, I want you to say that." He stared at her. "Why?" "Because I spent the night terrified too. Because I nearly came out a dozen times." She stepped closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Because I need to know I'm not alone in this, whatever this is." "Eliza," her name came out broken. "You know what this is." "Do I?" He laughed, short and sharp. "You think I ask just anyone to teach me letters? You think I care what the town says about anyone else? You think I can't sleep right when anyone else might be in danger?" The words hung between them, raw and honest. Eliza's heart hammered so hard she was sure he must hear it. "I'm used to being alone," he continued, voice dropping. "Been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to want anything else. Then you showed up, too tall and too proud and too everything, and suddenly alone felt like drowning." "Calder, I know we can't." He turned away, hands clenched. "I know what it would cost you, what little reputation you have left, your students, everything. I know that, but knowing doesn't stop the wanting." Eliza stood frozen, overwhelmed by the simple honesty of his confession. No pretty words, no grand gestures. Just truth, plain and devastating. "You think I'm not used to being alone," she heard herself say. "I've been alone in rooms full of people my whole life. Too tall to dance with, too educated to simper, too much of all the wrong things." Her voice caught. "But with you, I'm just right." He turned back, hope and anguish warring on his face. "Eliza, I know what it would cost. I've counted every price." She took the final step, bringing them close enough to touch. "But I've also counted what it costs to deny this, to pretend I come here just for lessons, to pretend my heart doesn't race when I see your light in the evening, to pretend—" He kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste, proper kisses she'd imagined in girlhood. This was desperate, hungry, full of weeks of denied longing. His hands framed her face, holding her like something precious and breakable, even as his mouth claimed hers with devastating thoroughness. She kissed him back, all her careful control crumbling. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, trying to erase any distance between them. He made a sound low in his throat and backed her against the wall, the solid wood a counterpoint to the vertigo of finally touching. When they broke apart, breathing ragged, Eliza felt transformed, every nerve alive, every defense shattered. "I'm sorry," Calder said hoarsely. "I shouldn't have—" She silenced him with another kiss, shorter but no less intense. "Don't apologize. Not for this." "The town. We'll talk anyway. They've been talking since I arrived." She smoothed his shirt where she'd wrinkled it. "I'm tired of living for their approval I'll never get. Your students need a teacher who knows her own worth, who doesn't shrink from hard choices." She met his eyes steadily. "I choose this. Choose you. If that makes me scandalous, I'll be scandalous." His thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He rested his forehead against hers, and for a moment they just breathed together, sharing air and warmth and possibility. "What happens now?" he asked. Now we figure it out as we go." She pulled back enough to see his face. "But first, you're going to eat something and rest. You look exhausted." "Bossy," he murmured, but his smile took any sting from the word. "Teacher," she corrected. "Now sit. I'll make coffee." As she moved around his kitchen, finding familiar comfort in the simple tasks, Eliza felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, there would be battles ahead, prices to pay, but rightness. She'd spent so long trying to fit into spaces too small for her, shrinking, apologizing, accepting less because she was told she was too much. But here, in this cabin with this man, she could expand, could be her full self without apology. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean and new. Change was possible, even in places that seemed frozen in their ways. She brought Calder coffee, noting how his eyes tracked her movement, how his fingers lingered when their hands brushed during the exchange. Such simple touches, but weighted with new meaning. "Thursday?" she asked, settling into her usual chair. "Thursday," he agreed, "though I might not get much reading done." "Then we'll work on your penmanship. Can't have you distracted from your education." His laugh warmed her more than the fire. Outside, the sun broke through clouds, making the snow-covered world sparkle like diamonds. Inside, two people who'd been alone too long sat in comfortable closeness, learning a new language that had nothing to do with letters. It wasn't proper, it wasn't safe, it certainly wasn't what either had planned. But it was theirs, and that was enough. A fire, a fight, and a town that chose sides. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous boy who wouldn't meet Eliza's eyes, official-looking, with the seal of the Mountain States Development Company. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the wax. "Notice of land acquisition intent," she read aloud to Mrs. Morrison. "The Mountain States Development Company hereby notifies residents of Copper Ridge that negotiations will commence for the purchase of lots 47 through 53 inclusive of all water rights, for the establishment of a railway depot and fuel station." "That's Calder's land." "Mrs." Morrison said sharply. "And the Hendersons' farm. The Olsons, too." Eliza scanned the rest of the letter. "There's a town meeting Friday evening. They're presenting their offer publicly." "Offer." The widow spat the word. "More like theft with a handshake. Seen it before they come in with promises and legal papers. Next thing you know, half the town's displaced and the other half is choking on coal smoke." The development company had chosen their targets well, the southern edge of town, where the misfits lived, where Calder had built his quiet life. where immigrant families like the Hendersons struggled to make their farms profitable, where no one had much political power.
I have to warn him,
Eliza said, already reaching for her shawl. Girl, it's broad daylight. You can't go traipsing to his cabin without the whole town noting it. She was right. Since the storm 2 weeks ago, Eliza and Calder had been painfully careful. Their Thursday lessons continued, but she arrived precisely at 7 and left precisely at 9. No lingering, no touches where anyone might see. The effort of maintaining that distance when all she wanted was to be close to him was exhausting. Then I'll send word with... She stopped. With who? What child could she send to Calder Holt without raising eyebrows? I'll go. Mrs., Morrison announced, hauling herself to her feet. Old woman visiting her neighbor about a business matter. Nothing scandalous in that. While the widow was gone, Eliza tried to focus on her lessons with Sarah Garrett, but her mind kept wandering to the implications. If the development company succeeded, Calder would lose everything. He'd have to leave, find somewhere else to start over. And she would lose him just when she'd found him. Miss Corbin, Sarah's timid voice broke through her thoughts.
Did I do something wrong?
No, dear, I'm sorry. My mind wandered. Eliza forced her attention back to the present. Your handwriting is much improved. See how even your letters are now. But even as she praised and corrected, part of her was already at that town meeting, fighting for the man she loved. Mrs. Morrison returned with grim news. He knows. The Hendersons, too. They're going to fight it, but... She shook her head. Development company has deep pockets and good lawyers. Going to take more than righteousness to win. Friday came too quickly. The town hall was packed, residents filling every seat and lining the walls. Eliza saw the clear division the established families in the front rows, the outsiders pushed to the back and sides. She stood with the Chinese families, the European immigrants, the ones who worked the hardest and were valued the least. The company men were slick as oil, with their tailored suits and practiced smiles. The lead negotiator, a Mr. Cornelius Blackwood, spread maps across a table with theatrical flair. Progress. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed. The railroad brings prosperity. Your small town will become a hub of commerce. Property values will soar. Everyone benefits. Everyone whose property you're not stealing, someone called out. Blackwood's smile never wavered. Fair market value will be paid, of course. We're not thieves, sir. We're businessmen. Same thing, another voice muttered. Calder stood against the side wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. He'd dressed carefully his best shirt, cleanly shaved, trying to look respectable. Eliza realized, trying to be taken seriously. The lots in question, Blackwood continued, are underutilized. A few subsistence farms, some residential properties of dubious value. Surely the greater good. My farm feeds 12 families, Eric Henderson interrupted, his Swedish accent thick with emotion. Good land, good water. You want to bury it under coal ash for the greater good. Progress requires sacrifice, Blackwood said smoothly. Easy to say when it's not your sacrifice. Calder spoke for the first time. Every head turned. You're not offering fair value. You're offering what you think desperate people will take. Mr. Blackwood consulted his papers. Holt. Is it the Hermit Blacksmith, sir? With respect, you're hardly in a position to judge fair value. Your land holdings are minimal. My land, my forge, my life. Calder stepped forward. Built with my own hands, my own sweat. You can't put a price on that. Actually, we can. Blackwood produced another paper. $1,700 for your complete holdings. More than generous for such modest accommodations. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was simultaneously a fortune and an insult, enough money to tempt, not enough to truly start over elsewhere. And if we refuse, this from Mrs. Henderson, clutching her husband's arm, eminent domain. Blackwood's shark smile widened. The railway is a public good. The government supports progress, one way or another. Gentlemen, that depot will be built. The crowd erupted. Shouts, arguments, fear and anger mixing into chaos. Eliza saw Prudence Walsh in the front row, looking satisfied. Of course she'd support anything that drove out the undesirables. Theodore smirked beside her. Mayor Garrett called for order, but his sympathies were clear. The established families would profit from the railway. Only the edges would burn. I would like to speak. Eliza heard herself say it before conscious thought caught up. The hall gradually quieted, all eyes turning to her. She felt the familiar weight of judgment but pushed through it. You don't live here, Prudence Walsh said coldly. This isn't your concern. I teach the children of this town. Their futures are my concern. Eliza moved to the front, using every inch of her height. Mr. Blackwood speaks of progress, but what he offers is destruction, not just of homes, but of community. Pretty words, Blackwood dismissed, but hardly relevant to. The Hendersons feed families who would otherwise go hungry. Mr. Olson employs 6 men at fair wages. Mr. Holt repairs tools for farmers who couldn't afford town prices. She met eyes around the room. You call them the edges, the undesirables, but they're the ones who keep this town running while others count profits. Miss Corbin, Mayor Garrett warned. You're out of order. No, sir. This meeting is out of order, allowing outsiders to come in and decide who deserves to keep their homes based on their bank accounts rather than their contributions. She turned to face the crowd fully. Today it's the South Edge. Tomorrow, when the railway needs more space, it might be your homes, your businesses. Once you let them start taking, where does it stop? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of the middle families looked thoughtful now, less certain. Furthermore, Eliza continued, momentum building. Has anyone examined the actual profit projections, the environmental impact, the contracts being offered? She pulled out papers homework she'd done in the sleepless nights since the letter arrived. Similar projects in Colorado and Wyoming left towns choking on coal dust, water supplies contaminated, and the promised prosperity went mostly to outside investors. Where did you get those figures? Blackwood demanded. I can read, Mr. Blackwood, and write, and research. She smiled thinly. Perhaps if you'd attended better schools, you'd have learned to do the same instead of relying on smooth talk and intimidation. Gasps and nervous laughter. She'd just insulted a powerful man publicly. Career suicide, if she'd had a career left to kill. This woman, Blackwood's composure cracked slightly, has no standing here. She's not even a property owner. She teaches our children, Mrs. Chen said clearly from the back. She has standing. She saved my daughter's education. Mrs. Garrett added, surprising everyone. That gives her voice weight. She helped my Daniel when no one else would. Martha Brennan stood, defying her husband's glare. I'll listen to her. One by one, voices rose. Not all supportive plenty still wanted her gone, but enough to show the division wasn't as clear as Blackwood had assumed. Calder moved then, coming to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that his presence felt like a shield. The lady's research is sound. I've looked at the same reports. This isn't progress, it's exploitation. Of course you'd say that, Prudence Walsh snapped. The two of you, carrying on like... Like what, Mrs. Walsh? Eliza's voice could have cut glass. Like teacher and student, because that's what we are, unless you have evidence otherwise. The woman's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Evidence was the one thing gossip never required, but accusations did. Mayor Garrett banged his gavel. We'll put it to a vote, all in favor of accepting the Mountain States Development Company's proposal. Hands raised many, but not the overwhelming majority Blackwood had expected. Eliza held her breath as the count was made. All opposed. More hands, the Hendersons, the Olsons, the immigrant families, but also other shopkeepers who realized losing customers would hurt them. Mothers who didn't want coal ash in their children's lungs. Men who'd been pushed around by companies before. The measure fails by 3 votes, Mayor Garrett announced, looking stunned. The offer is rejected. The room exploded. Blackwood's face went purple. This is a mistake. You're destroying your own futures for sentiment. No, Eric Henderson said firmly. We're saving them. People poured out into the night, arguing, celebrating, worrying. Eliza found herself swept along until a hand caught her elbow, guiding her to a quieter spot. That was magnificent, Calder said roughly, also possibly insane. I couldn't let them. She stopped, aware of eyes on them. Even now, even after what they'd won, propriety mattered. Your land is safe. For now. They'll be back, with better lawyers, more pressure. He looked tired suddenly. But tonight, we won. We did. They stood there, a careful foot apart, everything they wanted to say trapped by circumstances. Then Lucy Walsh appeared, eyes bright with excitement. Miss Corbin, that was wonderful. Aunt Prudence is beside herself. The girls seemed to realize that might not be tactful. I mean, she's very upset about the railway not coming. Change is hard for some, Eliza said diplomatically. Others approached then parents thanking her, opponents glaring. The town more divided than ever, but also more honest about it. The lines were drawn clearly now. No more pretending. Later, walking back to the Morrison house, Eliza felt the weight of what had happened. She'd stood up publicly, allied herself with outsiders, challenged powerful men. There would be consequences. Proud of you, Mrs., Morrison said simply when she arrived. Stupid, maybe, but brave. Sometimes they're the same thing. That night, Eliza sat by her window looking toward the hills, somewhere out there. Calder was probably doing the same thing, looking toward town, thinking of her. They'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. A soft tap at her door made her heart race, but it was only Lucy, slipping in with a conspiratorial air. I had to tell you, the girl whispered. Aunt Prudence met with Mr. Blackwood privately after the meeting. They're planning something. I couldn't hear what, but she mentioned your name. And Mr. Holtz said something about solving 2 problems at once. Eliza's blood chilled. Thank you for warning me. After Lucy left, Eliza sat in the dark, planning. Prudence Walsh and the development company joining forces meant trouble. But she'd faced trouble before. Been too tall, too smart, too much before. The difference now was she wasn't facing it alone. Somewhere in the night, allies waited. Parents who valued education over propriety, neighbors who understood community meant more than profit, and one man who saw her truly, completely, and found her exactly enough. Let them come. She'd stood in front of the whole town and spoken truth. She'd fight for the children, for the families pushed to the edges, for the right to exist without shrinking. The fire had been lit. Now they'd see who got burned. You're not too much for me. The consequences came swiftly. 3 days after the town meeting, Eliza arrived at the Garrett house to find her belongings packed in a crate on the porch. Mrs. Garrett wouldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, the woman said quietly. But Mr. Garrett says we can't. That is, Sarah's education needs to take a different direction. Mrs. Garrett, please. Sarah's made such progress. I know. Tears glimmered in the woman's eyes. But my husband has business dealings with Mr. Blackwood's company. We can't afford to seem allied with opposition. One by one, they fell. The Youngbloods canceled. The Andersons sent word they were reconsidering their educational needs. By Thursday, Eliza had lost half her students, income vanishing like snow in spring. She sat in Mrs. Morrison's kitchen that evening, calculating and recalculating figures that refused to improve.
$20 a month for room and board, she murmured. 12 from the remaining families. If they stay, $8 deficit. And that's if I eat nothing but rice and—
Stop that, Mrs. Morrison interrupted.
You'll make yourself sick with worrying. I need to worry. I need to plan.
Eliza rubbed her tired eyes.
Maybe if I offered to teach for less.
You lower your price. They'll know they've got you beat. The widow's voice was firm. Never show weakness to wolves. A knock at the door interrupted them. Eliza's heart leapt. Thursday evening. Time for Calder's lesson. But when Mrs. Morrison opened the door, it wasn't Calder. Theodore Walsh stood there, smirking. Miss Corbin, just the woman I was looking for. Mr. Walsh. Eliza stood slowly, wary.
What can I do for you?
It's more what I can do for you. He invited himself in, tracking mud across Mrs. Morrison's clean floor. I have a proposition. I'm not interested in—
Hear me out.
He held up a hand.
My aunt wants you gone. The development company wants certain obstacles removed, but I think we can find a mutually beneficial arrangement.
Eliza's stomach turned.
Go on.
The public school needs an assistant teacher, someone to handle the younger children while I focus on the older students. His smile was oily. The position pays $30 monthly, enough to live on comfortably. More than enough. It would solve every financial problem. But Eliza knew there would be conditions.
And in exchange, you stop your private tutoring, distance yourself from certain elements.
His meaning was clear.
Become a respectable member of the educational establishment instead of a radical disrupting the natural order.
You mean stop teaching the children you won't accept, stop supporting the families you consider beneath notice. I mean become a proper teacher instead of a troublemaker. His false friendliness dropped. This is a generous offer. Miss Corbin, more generous than you deserve after that display at the town meeting. And if I refuse— Theodore's smirk widened. Then things become difficult. Building inspections might find this house unsafe. Business licenses might be questioned. Did you know Mrs. Morrison hasn't paid certain taxes? Oversights can be so troublesome when brought to official attention. You're threatening an elderly woman to get to me. I'm offering you a chance to save her trouble. He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. Think about it. You have until Monday to decide. After that, he shrugged. Well, winter is hard for old bones. Be a shame if she lost her home. He left, and Eliza sank into her chair. Mrs. Morrison hadn't said a word throughout, but now she spoke. Don't you dare, Mrs. Morrison. Don't you dare take that deal on my account. The widow's eyes blazed.
I've survived worse than that weasel can dish out. You bend to him now. You'll be bending forever.
But your house
is mine, free and clear. Taxes are paid. Whatever lies he's spewing—
She paused.
Mostly paid. Close enough.
Before Eliza could respond, another knock came. This time it was Calder, carrying his slate and looking concerned. Saw Theodore leaving. Trouble, Eliza explained, watching his face darken with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Take the job, he said finally. Both women stared at him. Calder,
hear me out.
He set down his materials, running a hand through his hair. Take the job, but don't stop tutoring. Teach at the school during the day. Teach your real students in the evenings. Take his money and use it against him. They'll fire me the moment they find out. Maybe, but maybe by then you'll have saved enough to survive. Maybe by then, some of these families will have found their spines again. He met her eyes. Or maybe we'll have found another solution. He looked away. I've been thinking. About the meeting, about what you said. The town only recognizes property owners. Right people with standing.
Yes.
So get standing. He pulled out a paper. I own my land outright, cabin and 3 acres. I could subdivide, sell you a parcel, make you a landowner.
Eliza's breath caught. Calder, I can't afford.
$1.
His voice was rough.
Legal sale, legal deed. $1 for half an acre, enough for standing.
Why?
The word came out whispered.
He looked at her then. Really looked at her. Mrs.
Morrison mumbled something about checking the stove and disappeared into the kitchen. You know why, he said simply. They stood there, the paper between them representing so much more than land. It was protection, partnership, a public declaration of connection.
People will talk,
Eliza said weakly. People already talk. At least this gives them something true to gossip about. The development company will target you more. They already target me. Difference is, now I won't be fighting alone. Eliza took the paper with trembling hands.
Such a simple document, but it changed everything.
I accept. His smile transformed his weathered face. Good. We'll file it tomorrow. Make it official. And Theodore's offer, take that too. Let him think he's won. Calder's smile turned sharp. Then teach every child in this town what thinking for themselves looks like. They worked on his reading then, but the lesson felt different, charged with possibility, with plans taking shape. When 9 o'clock came, Calder lingered. Walk you home.
That's not necessary.
Please. Just that, but waited with everything they couldn't say in Mrs. Morrison's kitchen. She got her shawl, called goodbye to the widow, and stepped into the cold night with him. They walked slowly, not touching, but close enough that their breaths mingled in the frigid air. This changes things, Eliza said quietly. Everything's been changing since you arrived. He glanced at her. Question is, do we guide the change or let it happen to us? They reached the Morrison house too quickly. Calder stopped at the gate, seeming to gather himself. Eliza, I need you to know something. This land offer, it's not charity. It's not pity. He met her eyes in the dim starlight. It's hope. Hope that you'll stay. Hope that we can build something. Hope that... He stopped, struggling. Hope that what? Hope that one day I can court you properly, without the town making it into something ugly. His voice dropped. Hope that you might want that too. Eliza's heart thundered. Calder, I know it's too soon. I know there's too much against us, but I needed you to know. He stepped back. Take the teaching job. Take the land. Take your time. I'll be here. He turned to go, but Eliza caught his arm. Even through the thick coat, the contact sparked between them. You said I was too much, she said, that first night. Remember, everyone thinks I'm too much. I remember. You're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm just enough, exactly right, exactly as I am. She released his arm, stepped back. That's worth more than land or jobs or the town's approval. Eliza. Saturday. We'll file the papers Saturday. She managed a smile. And Monday. I'll walk into that school with my head high and teach alongside Theodore Walsh. And every evening, I'll teach the children who really need me. And Thursday nights. Thursday nights, I'll teach the man who sees me truly. She turned toward the door, then paused. You're not too much for me either. Calder Holt, in case you wondered. She went inside before he could respond, but through the window, she saw him stand there for a long moment, hand pressed to his chest as if holding something precious. Friday passed in preparation. Eliza wrote lesson plans, mended her best dress, practiced what she'd say to Theodore. Mrs. Morrison provided tart commentary and strong coffee. Lucy Walsh snuck by with intelligence the development company was regrouping, planning something, but she couldn't discover what. Saturday dawned clear and cold. Eliza met Calder at the county office, signed papers with steady hands. and became a landowner for the price of a single dollar. The clerk looked suspicious but couldn't find anything illegal in the transaction. Walking out, deed in hand, Eliza felt taller than ever, not just physically, but in presence, in possibility. She owned land. She had standing. She had allies. Celebration dinner, Calder suggested. Hotel restaurants open. Too public, Eliza said, then smiled. But Mrs. Morrison's making stew. You could join us. It was the first time they'd shared a meal in public view, even if that public was just one sharp-eyed widow. But it felt right, felt like a beginning. They ate and talked and planned how to use the school position to their advantage, how to protect the private students, how to fight the development company's next move. Practical things, but underneath ran a current of something else. Hope, perhaps, or simply the recognition that they were no longer alone in their struggles. As Calder prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Monday will be hard. Theodore won't make it easy. I know. If you need anything, I know where to find you. She smiled. Go home. Calder, I'll see you Thursday. He touched his hat brim and left. Mrs. Morrison, who'd been suspiciously quiet, finally spoke. That man's in love with you. I know. You're in love with him. I know that too. Good. The widow nodded decisively. About time you both admitted it. Now, let's plan how you're going to handle that weasel Theodore without strangling him. I imagine that would be frowned upon. They planned late into the night. By the time Eliza climbed to her tiny room, she felt armed for battle. Theodore Walsh thought he'd trapped her. The development company thought they'd won. They were about to learn what happened when they cornered a woman who'd finally stopped trying to shrink herself to fit their expectations. She had land, allies, love even if she couldn't claim it publicly yet, and a spine of pure steel. Monday would come with its challenges, but tonight she owned a piece of Montana earth, and somewhere under the same stars, a man who found her exactly right was probably reading by lamplight, forming careful letters with scarred hands. She was not too much. She was precisely enough, and that was worth fighting for. She slept and woke to coffee, not regret. The months that followed blurred together like pages in a well-loved book. Spring arrived slowly in Montana, melting snow revealing the earth beneath, and with it, changes neither Eliza nor Calder had dared to imagine. Theodore Walsh lasted exactly 6 weeks as her colleague before his own incompetence undid him. The breaking point came when half his students failed the state examinations while every one of Eliza's passed with honors. Parents who'd been cowed by Prudence Walsh's influence began asking pointed questions about why the assistant teacher's pupils excelled while the head teachers floundered. It's because she undermines my authority, Theodore had raged in the school board meeting, his soft face red with humiliation. She teaches them to question, to think, to challenge. Yes, Eric Henderson said calmly. That's what teachers do. The vote was unanimous. Theodore was dismissed, and Eliza became head teacher of Copper Ridge School. The salary wasn't lavish, but combined with her evening tutoring, it was enough, more than enough. The development company made one last attempt, bringing lawyers and threats of eminent domain, but they hadn't counted on Eliza's careful research bearing fruit. The land titles she'd helped the immigrant families properly file, the water rights she'd ensured were documented. The environmental impact studies she'd demanded all of it created a legal tangle that would cost more to unravel than the land was worth to them. They withdrew, seeking easier prey elsewhere. Copper Ridge remained unchanged, which was exactly the change its people needed. But the greatest change was the most personal. It was a Thursday evening in late May. Eliza arrived at Calder's cabin for their usual lesson to find the table set with 2 plates, wildflowers in a mason jar, and the smell of stew filling the air. "What's this?" she asked, pausing in the doorway. Calder stood by the stove, wearing a clean shirt she'd never seen before, his hair still damp from washing. Figured it was time to celebrate properly. You've been head teacher for a month. I can read entire books now. The town didn't burn down. He smiled. That rare expression that transformed his face seemed worth marking. They ate by candlelight, talking about everything and nothing. The children's progress, the Hendersons' new baby, Mrs. Morrison's latest feud with the pastor's wife over flower arrangements. Comfortable conversation between two people who'd learned each other's rhythms. When the dishes were cleared, Calder pulled out not his slate, but a folded paper. "I wrote something," he said, suddenly shy.
Wanted to see if I got it right.
Eliza unfolded it carefully. His handwriting was still careful, deliberate, but clear.
Eliza, they said you were too much. Too tall, too smart, too proud. They were wrong. You were too much for spaces too small to hold you. But here, with me, you fit perfect. You always have. I love you. I have since that night you told Tom Brennan exactly what his son needed. Maybe before. I'm not good with pretty words. But these are true ones. Will you marry me, Calder?" The paper trembled in her hands. She looked up to find him kneeling beside her chair, a simple gold band in his scarred fingers. "I know it's not conventional," he said quietly. "I know people will talk. I know you could do better than a broken-down blacksmith who just learned his letters. But I promise no one will ever work harder to make you happy. No one will ever see you clearer or love you more for exactly who you are."
"Calder," her voice broke on his name.
"You don't have to answer now. You can think."
She silenced him with a kiss, pouring months of careful distance and denied longing into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she was smiling through tears. "Yes," she said simply.
"Yes to all of it. Yes to you."
He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. It fit perfectly, like everything between them unexpected but right. "When?" he asked, standing and pulling her up with him.
"Soon, before school starts in the fall."
She laughed, giddy with possibility.
"Give the town all summer to gossip and get it out of their systems."
"They'll say you're marrying beneath you." "Let them. I know the truth." She touched his face, marveling at the freedom to do so. "I'm marrying the man who saw me when everyone else saw too much, who gave me solid ground when I had none, who learned to read so he could write me love letters."
"Just the one letter."
"So far," she smiled. "I expect many more now that you've proven you can." They were married 6 weeks later in the school she'd fought to teach in, surrounded by an unlikely mix of witnesses. Mrs. Morrison, tears streaming down her weathered face. The Hendersons and Chens and Olsons, their children throwing flower petals. Even Martha Brennan, defying her husband one last time to see the woman who'd saved her son's education find happiness. Prudence Walsh did not attend. Neither did the establishment families. But Lucy Walsh slipped in the back, beaming, and that was worth more than all the society matrons combined. Eliza wore the blue dress Mrs. Chen had helped her make from the gifted fabric. Calder wore his good shirt and a new vest, looking uncomfortable but determined. When Pastor Williams asked if anyone objected, the silence was profound. No one dared. Not anymore. That night, in the cabin that was now their home, Eliza stood by the window watching stars appear. Calder came up behind her, arms circling her waist, chin resting on her shoulder, a gesture possible only because of her height, their bodies fitting together like puzzle pieces. "Regrets?" he asked softly.
"Never."
She leaned back into his warmth.
"You."
"Only that it took so long to find you." They stood there as darkness deepened. Two people who'd thought themselves meant for solitude, discovering the profound peace of being truly known and loved, despite because of everything they were. In the morning, Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through windows and the smell of coffee brewing. Calder was already up, standing at the stove in worn pants and suspenders, humming tunelessly as he cooked. This was her life now. Not the grand classroom in Missouri she'd dreamed of. Not the respectability she'd thought she wanted. Instead, this cabin with its books and warmth. This man who moved quietly through the morning routine. This town that had fought her and been changed by her in return. "Morning, Mrs. Holt," Calder said without turning, knowing she was awake by some indefinable change in the air between them. "Morning, Mr. Holt." She stretched, luxuriating in the freedom of being home. "What's for breakfast?" "Eggs from the Hendersons, bread from Mrs. Chen, coffee strong enough to wake the dead." He glanced over his shoulder. "And a new student starting Monday, the mayor's youngest daughter. Seems she heard the Holt School is the best in the territory." The Holt School. That's what they're calling it. Your teaching, on land I subdivided. He brought her coffee, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Our school. Really?" "I like the sound of that." She took the cup, fingers brushing his. "I like the sound of our everything. Even our troubles. The development company might come back. Prudence Walsh certainly isn't done causing problems. Even those." She set down the coffee, taking his face in her hands. "I spent so long trying to fit into spaces that didn't want me, trying to be less so others would be comfortable. But you never asked me to be less. Never wanted less, wanted all of you, every too much inch." She kissed him then, slow and sweet, with the promise of countless mornings just like this. When they broke apart, he was smiling that rare, transformative smile. "School board meeting tonight," he reminded her. "Want to propose those new textbooks? And the expansion to include older students?" She grinned. "Prudence will hate it." "Good thing you're a landowner with full voting rights then. Good thing I married a man who made that possible." They rose together, moving through the morning routine with the ease of two people learning each other's rhythms. Breakfast at the small table where she'd taught him letters, planning lessons while he repaired a harness. Simple domestic life that felt like a miracle after so much struggle. As Eliza prepared for school, pinning her hair in the small mirror, she caught sight of herself. Still tall, still angular, still too much by conventional standards. But the woman in the mirror stood straight, not from defiance, but from confidence. The shadows under her eyes were gone, replaced by a glow that came from being loved exactly as she was. "Ready?" Calder asked from the doorway, offering to walk her to school as he did every morning now. "Ready," she confirmed, gathering her books and papers. They walked through town together, no longer hiding their connection. Let people see, let them talk. The children were learning, the community was stronger, and two people who'd thought themselves destined for loneliness had found their way to each other. At the schoolhouse door, Calder touched his hat brim in their daily ritual. "Have a good day, Mrs. Holt." "You too, Mr. Holt." She watched him walk toward the forge he'd rebuilt in town, bringing his business closer to their life together. Then she turned to face her classroom, where children of all backgrounds waited to learn not just letters and numbers, but how to think, question, and stand tall in a world that might try to make them small. This was her life, not what she'd planned, but what she'd fought for and won. A place where she fit perfectly, where too much was exactly enough, where she could wake each morning to coffee and love and the knowledge that she was home. The bell rang, and Eliza Holt began another day of changing the world one student at a time, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Outside, spring bloomed across Montana, bringing new growth to old ground. And in a small school in Copper Ridge, children learned that being different wasn't something to hide, but something to celebrate. Taught by a woman who'd refused to shrink and found her place by standing tall. Thank you all so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Eliza and Calder's journey touched your heart as much as it did mine. I'd love to hear where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what resonated with you in this tale of finding love and acceptance in the most unexpected places. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories. 1850, hit that like button. And don't forget to click the hype button to help more people discover these tales of courage, love, and the American frontier. Until next time, partners.